how a stick moves and how the body moves and the physics involved in that. I'm afraid I'm not going to do math because I can't do math. But what I've discovered is that there are at least two approaches in the SCA, and I'm really only familiar with the West Coast approach. And this applies very well to the West Coast approach. It's a way of explaining how most of the people you'll see on the West Coast move their stick. They may not think of it that way, but this is a way of understanding how they're moving their stick. I've watched YouTube video of some folks outside of the West Coast, and some of them use techniques that don't fit well with this. They use a lighter stick with a heavier hand. It's more of a snapping motion, sort of a crack to whip sort of thing, and that doesn't seem to apply well to what I'll be teaching today. So you may run across that and go, hey, this doesn't fit at all, and you're right. This technique is designed around the idea of using a fairly heavy sword, intending to hit your opponent fairly hard. Typically a sword that is a little more tip heavy than not. The balance point might be about here. So if your balance point is way back here, it's going to feel awkward with this style. Today we're going to just use these planks of wood for swinging things around because I like the balance for teaching how things swing. So anyways, so what is a circle sword style? That's what we're going to be talking about all day here. It's an approach to sword work that interprets all movements of the sword in terms of circles. The reason for that kind of a style is reduction of joint strain by having a clear follow-through for every blow. You never end up twisted up where there's nowhere to go if you don't hit something. Reduction of antagonistic muscle tension resulting in faster blows. Your body knows when it's going to get hurt. And if you've been fighting for a while, eventually you will make a mistake and your body will hurt if you've got a hole in your technique. And once your body has been hurt once, even though you think that you're throwing your blow as fast as you can, your body's going to try to hold back on you and not let you do that thing that hurt it last time. You can think about like if you have a red hot burner on your stove, but you've never seen an electric stove before, and your buddy comes up and says, hey, watch this. Why don't you touch that pretty red thing? Oh, no problem, bang, and you burn your hand really bad. And they said, okay, I'll pay you $100 if you touch it again. Your body's going to fight you, isn't it? Even if you're determined, I'm going to earn that $100, your body's just going to pull back against it. It's the same thing. You hurt your elbow, you hurt your shoulder, your body's going to try to keep you from doing that thing that hurt it again. So the idea of a circular fighting style where you've got follow-throughs for everything is that you're regaining the trust of your body. You're teaching your body that, yeah, I know when I was young and stupid, I threw this shot and it hurt. But now, when I throw this shot, always there's this follow-through for the shot. Always there's the safety. Go ahead, relax, throw it as fast and hard as you can. You're safe. You've got some place for that sword to go if it doesn't work out. And your subconscious, your bones, your muscles will listen to that eventually as you train it in. We're going to work on developing understanding of how blows travel and generate force that allows many different blows to be understood using the same foundations of movement. So if we interpret all of our blows as a circular sword motion, suddenly it's not this trick shot and that trick shot and variant number 5, and each one is completely separate in your mind. Instead, there are one or two ways of generating force and moving, and that applies to all of your varied blows, no matter how tricky the shot is. That makes it simpler for your conscious mind, and it makes it simpler for your nervous system, which speeds you up, makes you able to respond to other things faster. We're going to work on developing an integrated understanding of blow dynamics, which allows one blow to smoothly transition into another, and for blocks to transition into blows. So by putting everything along a circular pattern, we don't have to think of combinations as discrete items. Every blow has the potential to lead to another blow, and once we get to the more advanced ideas, your blocking positions will also be along those same patterns, and so you can move directly from a block to a blow without resetting or adjusting your stance. One result of this method is that the sword can be used for both offense and defense, rendering the shield a valued luxury. Because the movement of a block is right along the same path as the movement to a blow, it's not block, reset, throw, which means if your opponent keeps attacking, it's block, 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 block until they hit you. You can actually turn that tide and send back a response without having the shield. Shields are great though. They can limit where your opponent has the option to threaten you, and you can block with it independently when you need to. So it's a very sword-centric style that we'll be working on So historically, does this approach fit in with real medieval fighting? The answer is yes and maybe. I've utilized a lot of the 14th century manual, the 133, as a foundation for the essential guards and the simplest blows, and then we kind of extrapolate from that. That manual clearly shows the sword being used for both offense and defense, and for thrusting, people who don't believe you can thrust. A later period broadsword manual, I think it was George Silver's Paradox of Defense, speaks repeatedly of compassing blows. And in context, I think he's talking about a circular movement of the sword, spinning it around an axis. It's hard to know for sure, but that seems to be what he's talking about there as well. That aside, I started on the path of working on circular blows when I blew my elbow out, tennis elbow, and I couldn't even hold my sword out like this. I had to lay off for at least a half year or so and then come back slowly. And I determined, I don't care how many people I can kill with this particular shot or whatever, if I don't have a follow through, I'm not going to throw it anymore. I'm just going to take it out of my game. And then since then, I've continued to evolve it and get influenced by some other fighters that have also moved in that circular path. And I was well along that path when I ran into George Silver and the 133 manual and found that they actually merge together pretty well. But I'm certainly not trying to be just historical. I'm interested in how can we hit our opponents in the SCA as much as anything. So I'm going to get into a lot of detail on sword stuff, which leads me to want to say what isn't covered in this class. It's an attempt to teach everything, but there are things that are not covered. A couple of very important things we're not going to talk much about is footwork. And don't get me wrong, footwork is probably one of the most important things that you do in your fight. So don't neglect it. Shield work. Shield work's good. Some people are real sophisticated with shields. I'm pretty simple with shield work, but shield work's a great thing for your fighting. And physical conditioning is another thing that is a really important element of your fighting. So you don't want to get obsessed on sword work. Sword work's really important, but those other three things are very important as well. Not to mention the mental game. So, putting it all in perspective, I like to talk about learning how to fight as an analogy to learning how to read. You start out with ABCs, and you sing the little song and learn the ABCs. Those are the smallest elements of learning how to read. You work your way up to words, phonetics. And then you build a vocabulary of words. You start reading simple books, right? Curious George, whatever. You get into advanced reading and writing. And when you get into advanced reading and writing, you're focused on content, right? So you're reading your chemistry textbook. You're not thinking ABCs, right? You're not thinking phonetics. You're not even thinking about the words. You're trying to understand the concept that this book is trying to teach you. And that's where your fighting goes eventually. Today we're working on ABCs and phonetics. We're really going to be thinking about every little detail of how a sword moves. The mistake is to become, there's two mistakes. One is to think that you don't have to drill it. You do have to drill it. Just like learning ABCs, you have to drill it and drill it and drill it until you don't think about it anymore. It's only when it becomes completely a part of how your body moves and how you think about things that you can stop thinking ABCs and you can actually just do it and think about the content of the fight. When you're facing off with an opponent, it's a relationship, it's a thing that goes on, and it's their intent to hit you and not to get hit, your intent to hit them, and how that plays out. That's the real fight. And if you're busy thinking ABCs, how am I going to throw that blow? What am I going to do over here? It detracts from your involvement in what's really going on. So thinking about how you had to learn how to read and how many years that took, and what it's like when you're a little kid reciting your ABCs versus what it's like when you're reading a book now, gives you an idea of where your fighting has to go. We learn something new, we're back in the ABCs, we train it in, and then we're back to reading the real content of the fight. And then to take that analogy one step farther, we're going to be talking about all these rules, right, about how you move and what you do. Just like writing, there's the chemistry textbook, and then there's poetry. In poetry, you start to break some of the rules. You can't really write poetry if you never really learned how to write in the first place. You've got to know the rules, but you can start playing with the rules a little bit, bending them, stretching them a little, and that's perfectly okay once you're at that point in your understanding of the fight. One last little analogy is that of the toolbox and the craftsman. We're going to be talking about toolbox here, apply physically to the fight. Understand that there is a whole other step to that. Every craftsman would like to have a good toolbox, but ultimately you are going to want to focus on that mental game. That's the craftsman part, understanding when to apply the tool, how to apply the tool, under what circumstances, what makes it work. The tool itself won't make the project. The craftsman has to take that tool and make the fight work. That leads me to a little lecture. I have seen some fighters that are, in their sort of intermediate stages where they move beautifully. I love watching them fight, but they're losing most of their fights still. And usually what happens there is they've got their physical technique down. It's a thing of beauty to be admired, but they haven't made that intersect with the reality of what's happening in the actual fight that they're in. They're throwing that blow as soon as they can throw it and as fast as they can throw it, with no regard to what their opponent happens to be doing at the time. And that means that a lot of their blows are still hitting their opponent's shield, which is great. It's one of the steps in developing their fighting. They've got the physical skill now, but there comes a point where you've got to let your body know the physical skill, and then to set that aside and get your brain in the fight, thinking about what you want to accomplish. What are you trying to make your opponent think and feel in the fight, when you're applying that shot, when it's going to land. That becomes the important thing that makes the difference between being a physically beautiful fighter and winning your fight. So keep in mind that the physical part of fighting is just the tool. It's the mental game that creates the victory. All right, so let's start getting into some physical stuff here. I'm going to breeze through stances real quick because most of you are experienced fighters already, but there are some little features I want to point out as we go through it. For today's class, since you are mostly experienced fighters, stand however you like, however you're comfortable in your normal fight. You should be fine. For really new fighters, if you happen to be teaching a new fighter, I recommend a square stance because it's symmetrical on each side. When they do something on this side, it'll feel the same as when they do it on this side. So it keeps it simple for them in the beginning. I don't recommend fighting in a square stance all the time, actually, though. So universal rules. I'm always looking for universal rules. A universal rule for footwork, one, is the knees should be inside of the foot placement because it allows faster change of direction and it takes less energy to stand that way. So to give you an example of what I mean, okay, here the feet are a little outside of where the knees are, right? And that's true here too. Here the knee has gone outside of the foot placement. Here the knee has gone outside of the foot placement. Whenever the knee gets outside of the foot placement, you've gone a little too far. That would be okay. This is probably even better when you're in armor, you've got the extra weight, but that's too far. When your knee is inside of the foot placement, all you have to do is release the tension in your leg, and you will begin moving in the direction of the leg that you've released the tension on, which allows you to move without muscular effort. You're actually reducing your muscular effort, and you're moving in that direction immediately. Because when your knees are inside of your foot placement, you're like a stool that's using this for support. When you remove that support, you fall in the direction that you removed the support from. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it's a great way of closing ground with throwing shots. Other universal rule, toes always point the same direction as knees. And this is one where you even see advanced fighters mess this up sometimes, but it always comes at a cost. One, it hurts your knee over time, and two, it reduces your ability to bring power up from the ground into your shot, which we'll talk about more later. So you wonder, how does this happen? It's a pretty simple rule. Usually it happens when someone turns. So, like, if I want to go this way, I might turn like this, and now my knee has come out of line with my toe. My hips have tried to turn, but my foot is stuck to the ground, and that's the position I end up in. Even momentarily, that's a bad thing. So there are two solutions to that. One is to pivot the whole leg at the same time, either pivoting on the heel or on the toe, allowing that to stay in line. That's a perfectly okay solution. Another solution to that comes out of the Tai Chi background more is to leave the whole leg behind, which means opening the hip joint. So here my hips are kind of, I'll exaggerate, my hips are closed. If I turn that way, I allow this hip joint to open and I leave the knee, the toe, the whole leg behind, which means relaxing that hip as I turn. That gives you a solid foundation on the foot you've left behind even while you're turning your body. And then after you're there, you can bring everything back. But the thing to avoid at all costs is letting that knee come out of line with the toe at any point. And you certainly don't want to develop a ready stance where it's already out of line. It's definitely something to watch for. But start watching for it in your movement. You'll find that if your transitional movements are solid, you'll have more ability to respond to unexpected things, like an unexpected opportunity to generate force and hit your opponent, or an unexpected need to block something. All right, so 3 essential stances. We'll just cover them very roughly. Got a left lead, a right lead, and a square stance. In a square stance, my opponent's in front of me. It's just just like this. You're facing straight forward. It's based like on the martial arts horse stance. The strengths of a square stance of any kind is you have balanced rotational power in both directions. I can wind my body up this way as much as I can wind up this way. It's excellent for lateral movement. So I can step this way, I can step this way by just relaxing the leg and removing the leg of the stool and following that direction. The weaknesses of a square stance is I'm slow to move to going forward or backwards. Backwards can be a real liability because that's how you get out of range a lot of times. So that's a real problem with the square stance. And both legs are equally exposed to attack, which means more work for me as far as defense, being aware of where my openings are. Personally, I think the square stance can work pretty well against a kneed opponent, a legged opponent, because you don't need to be able to back up as quickly. And that lateral movement is particularly useful against an opponent that isn't able to keep shifting with you. But it's more dangerous for two standing opponents, I think. Variations for a square stance. Knees and toes in for rotational power. This comes out of Wing Chun, where the knees and the toes are in. It's a knock-kneed stance. You know, if you bring the toes in, you got to bring the knees in. Knees and toes still in alignment. But what it does is it allows you to turn farther this way and farther this way, which gives you more wind-up and more follow-through on motions. And it really locks you into the ground. A place where that can be useful, especially for really big, lanky guys, is in a home guide fight, where if they take their normal stance and brace themselves, they're already out of the ring. This kind of little knock-kneed stance allows them to settle into the ground and get the power that they need without being real wide. The Wing Chun, Southern Kung Fu, and the story is that it was developed for fighting on little boats and things, and so you couldn't be taking big stances doing these little narrow skiffs and stuff. So it has its advantages. Knees and toes out for stability. That's this kind of a thing. Not much use for a swordsman, but a pikeman, or maybe a great swordsperson, where what you really just need is a real strong base. That can be very comfortable and useful. A square stance can be oriented perpendicularly to your opponent, or turned sideways. So this is what we're talking about right now. If you guys are my opponent, facing straight on, but you can turn it diagonally to your opponent, or this way to your opponent. It's still a square stance as far as how your body is set up. So, some variants. All right, so other stance. We've got, okay, so the right lead stance, that's the primary stance I tend to use. That puts your sword side forward. I'm kind of transitioning my thoughts about the exact foot placement on it, but it's something like this. So you've got your right leg leaning forward, left leg back. The strengths of this sort of a stance is you've got more power for your offside shots, because you've got a complete wind-up for the offside. You've got longer sword reach. You've got the width of your shoulders lined up to reach out this way. It moves the left leg, the leg that's nearer to a right-handed opponent's sword side. It moves it back and harder to get to. It has excellent maneuverability with power. You can still move side to side pretty well, but you've got a real ability to move backwards and forwards. And it's easier to block onside shots. Your right-handed opponent goes into this zone. You're facing that zone. All you have to do is put things in front of you, and it's blocked. There's no weird awkward twisting for the onside shot. Weaknesses to the right stance is you've got less power for your onside shots. Just like I can really line up here, I don't have as much wind-up available to me on this side. It takes a bit more energy to hold your shield up. Your shield's kind of hanging out here. There's less sword freedom in close. The same thing that gave me all this extra reach. I've got opponents standing here. It crowds my sword arm now if I'm in really close. That's a bad thing about a left stance. And it's more awkward to block offside shots. They're kind of over here. It's hard to turn your body to face that shot. So it's important with any stance to know that it's not perfect. It's got pluses and minuses. Apply it to the right situation. We've got some variations to talk about. Narrow means talking side to side. So here would be a wide right lead stance, and here would be a narrow right lead stance. When you're narrow, forward and backwards, you're already in kind of a natural position. If you go wider, suddenly it's a little harder to get yourself moving forward and backwards, but much like the square stance, you've got more rotational power available to you. You can drive your body side to side more. So narrow or wide, you're going to vary that depending on what you're intending to accomplish. Longer for stability, and for power and for smaller targets. By longer, I mean front to back. So if you're here, you can make your targets very small. You can take a charge. You're really stable. You've got a brace. Shorter, like this, you've got more steps. So when I'm like this, how far can I step forward? Not very far. When I'm like this, if I relax, I can take a good stride from there, or I can even pass through easier. So wider for stability, being smaller for targets, shorter for being able to step more. One last variation of a right lead stance is you can do more of a boxer stance. And actually, instead of bracing this back leg back like this, you can come up on the toe. Remember, toe and knee stay in line still. So you turn the toe and the knee and come up on the toe. Interesting thing about this stance, allows you to rock back and cover. You've got something to push off with when you're throwing shots. Downside of the stance is it's very unstable side to side, and you're under tension all the time, which can be tiring depending on your physical conditioning. But it does give you a nice springboard to throw shots from. So we're talking symmetry here. We talked about a right lead stance. We've got to talk about a left lead stance, and this is where the FCA all came from, was the left lead stance pretty much. So left lead stance, some kind of thing like this with your left leg forward. We've got more power for our onside shots. Big windup available to us to deliver our onside shots. Good maneuverability, just like the right lead stance. More freedom when when you're in close to your opponent. So here's my opponent. I'm right up here against him. I still got lots of room to move my sword around back here, no problem. Shield is easy to hold with a left lead stance. Shield can rest right against my body if I want, rest it against the hip. Anywhere in here, it's just hanging in a natural position. It's not being held out here in the middle of nowhere. So it's easier on the shield arm. And it's easier to block offside shots because now I'm facing my offside. Come around there. It's right in front of me. Weaknesses of a left lead stance. Less power for offside shots. I don't have this big wind up on this side. Less sword reach. Now I've lost the width of my shoulders. I can compensate for that some with body rotation, but it's still not the same as being able to turn my shoulders all the way this way. Left leg, the near leg to a right-handed opponent is a really easy target for them now. It's very close, which means I've got to pay more attention to blocking that leg. And it's more awkward to block onside shots. They throw over here, I've got to twist to this option spot if I want to sword block an onside shot. I'm not facing the shot anymore. Variations are exactly the same as they were for the right lead stance. You've got narrow and wide, long and short, and they have the same effects on your ability to rotate or move back and forth. In fact, the springboard, the boxing springboard, is even more effective for the left lead because you've got the spring on the same side as your sword hand. You're left-handed. I got a bad habit. I talk right and left-handed. You just have to translate. Yeah. Just bring it that way. All right. So let's start talking about sword stuff. I like to have the little footwork thing. One, because there's some universal rules in there. I really like to get that knee and toe thing across to people. But mostly we're going to be talking about swords today. So lines of attack. We're going to start out with generalities. We're going to focus in over the course of the class and get into details. In fact, I'm going to lie to you a little bit. I'm going to be real general about some things. Like, here's the universal rule, and then later we're going to say, well, that was true except in this particular case. So we'll narrow in on things. So four zones or lines of attack. We've got high outside, high inside, low outside, low inside. We don't really. That's really how it would be if we were facing our opponent. We more think about for now about our personal zones for our guards, our guards. So that's what we're going to talk about more. So we've got high right. So over on your sword side, anywhere up here, on the shoulder, up in the air, wherever, something up in this zone. We'll talk about it being in the high right. High left. It's going to be over in this zone. It could be on the shoulder. It could be up here. We've got low right, so that's anywhere back in here somewhere. And low left, that's anywhere down in here. I say I'm being very general here because there's lots of perfectly valid ways to hold your sword in each of these zones. But from each zone, the way we move and the way we generate force will be pretty much the same no matter which of those particular spots you started in. So we're going to talk in generalities. Oh, and high center, somewhere up in here. Could be like this, could be like that. So we have 4 angles of attack based on where these blows are starting from. So we've got horizontal shots, things that come across. We've got vertical shots coming straight up and down. Or actually, as we start to apply these, it'll be almost straight up and down. And we've got diagonal shots. That's things along the diagonals in both directions. Obviously, although we might train this diagonal, if the actual opening was more at this angle, that's the angle we throw at. So it's generality again. We learn the basic motion, and that'll allow us to focus it in on the specific. In my notes, there's a long lecture on how we name things, so that we have an easy way of explaining what we're doing physically, but we're not going to talk about that in class. All right, so we're going to go to the 5 guards, which are taken pretty much right out of the 133 manuscript. They illustrate 7. We'll start with just 5 of them. So we kind of went through them in a way already. High right is going to be, in the manual, it's right here on the shoulder, but really anywhere in here is good. The sword tip is back, but the hand is near the high right. High left, it's going to be over here. Low left could be all the way up here, could be down here. And low right is going to be down here. And high center is here. Let's go ahead and have everybody get a wood lat at this point, so we can actually stand in those guards and start talking about how to come from them. Sticking our sword in our leg or shoulder. Not such a big deal with a rattan stick, but if you ever take a hatchet or God forbid, a steel sword and hack up something like a couch, it's great fun, but you start thinking about the fact that, you know, if I actually manage to cut through, where is that blow going to go so it doesn't hurt me? It becomes really important. So we're going to train that right from the start. Every blow has a place to go. Second, you learn how and where to naturally stop the movement of the sword so that it can be redirected into a new angle of attack without strain. When you've got a place for your sword blow to go, it goes there and it comes to a natural stop without you having to struggle to redirect or stop the motion of the weapon. You'll notice that we're not adding any body dynamics to add force to these sword cuts yet. That's something that's easier to grasp once we start talking specifically about circle theory. And then after we study circle theory, we're going to come back and add force to some of these basic cuts. One last item before we begin swinging sticks. The reason we're using these sticks instead of our SCA swords, first of all, there's no wrist restraint. We're going to be talking a lot about things that really involve manipulating the motion of your sword. You may find that your particular weapon and cup hilt get in your way. If they do, I recommend modifying your equipment until you can move comfortably. I'm hoping I'll show you the advantages of this kind of movement here to the point where you go, it's worth the effort of fixing my equipment so that I can move well. The other thing is, this is not too hand heavy. Some people's swords are very heavy in the hand, would not feel comfortable with this kind of a swinging style. This will give you a feel for what it's like having a weapon that's more equally balanced. There's a clear sense of the flat and the edge with these, which we are all recommended to remember in our SCA fighting, even though it's not absolutely essential. If you pick up a real sword, it matters a lot whether your edge is on the line or not when you hit. So you might as well train with that in mind. Another really subtle reason we're using these is when you throw a sword blow at speed, you never notice the weight of the weapon pulling down towards the ground. Because centrifugal force is pulling it out that way. It supports itself as it goes around. Now, when you're training, you're going to be working on principles and things moving slowly and thinking about how the weapon moves. Since you're moving slowly, there's not as much centrifugal force, and you feel the weight of the weapon pulling down. That's something that you wouldn't be feeling at speed with your real weapon. So, for training, why have a force that you have to contend with that will not be there when you're moving at speed with a real weapon? So going with something lighter, you don't have as much of that gravity fighting against you. You can move slowly and be thinking about the things that are involved with a real sword blow rather than struggling with the weight of the thing pulling towards the ground, a weight that you would not have to deal with at speed. So those are all reasons that I use something either this way or lighter. I mean, I started out using my yardstick at home a lot, and still like that for some things. All right, so basic cuts. Horizontals. Let's start in high right. Put it on your shoulder. You can hold it up here, whichever you like. We're just going to establish the line of cuts. So with your front edge of your weapon, you cut across, say about chin height, keeping it nice and flat, And when it starts getting uncomfortable, let it turn over and end up over here in high left. So from high left, cutting with the front edge of the weapon, just cut across, horizontal plane, until it starts getting uncomfortable, let it roll over, and end up over here in high right. So you've got two different guards, and one guard cuts across the other guard, and then back to the other guard. All right, so other horizontals. Let's start down here in low right. Now, low right in a lot of the manuals, they show the point down like this. I find for our game, if you bring the point up, you get a little longer swing, and it's easier to hit hard. Maybe it's the difference between chopping and slicing. But for us, it seems like it's better to have it hit up a little bit. But the hand is down here in the low right. So we're going to start low right, and we're going to cut across at about knee height, front edge. Across, 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 until it starts getting uncomfortable, let it roll over, and end up here in low left. Now we're going to go from low left, we're going to cut across, horizontally, leading edge. When it gets uncomfortable, let it roll over, and then come all the way back. When it's swinging, you'll feel it want to swing up to here. It'll come rather naturally at speed. So back up to low right. So diagonals, start with high right, and we're up in here. We're going to cut diagonally from high right, across in front of us with the front edge of the weapon. And when it gets uncomfortable, let it roll over, and you end up in low left. Now from low left, we're going to cut diagonally upwards, front edge, until it starts to get uncomfortable, let it roll over, and end up in high right. Now we'll switch over here to high left, and we're going to cut diagonally with the front edge of the weapon, across, down into low right. We're going to let it roll over and just let it keep swinging all the way up to about here. And then from here, we're going to cut with the front edge of the weapon, coming up diagonally, up into high left. So those are your diagonal lines. You go in both directions. So next we have near verticals. That's starting with the sword up the top here. I say near verticals because we're not going to throw straight down. We're actually going to cut from high center to, first we'll go to the low left. So you're going to cut down, and then you're going to guide slightly off to the side, and then head down here to the left. I think we'll roll over when it gets uncomfortable down there. Now with the front edge of the weapon, we can come back the other way if we want. Up this way and in high center. I don't really so much believe in the cuts from, I like the symmetry of it, but I don't really use the cuts from the low right, low left to high center. I tend to just go to that diagonal personally. Anyways, so at high center, we can also divert off to low right as it comes down. And we could reverse and go the other way. That would be a great cut shot. Okay, so those are the near verticals. There is such a thing as a true vertical. Right here, you're just coming straight down. You can see the problem with this. But if you're in a tournament fight and that is where the slot is, and by God you need to come straight down, that's okay. It tends to happen against dealing opponents sometimes when you want to drop that. And the answer is, if you miss your opponent, and you're using a rattan sword anyways, just bend your knees. And if you bend your knees a little bit, you'll the tip will bury in the ground rather than continuing to swing into your crotch. So that is one solution to the straight down and cut. If you get in trouble, just bend your knees a little and just hit the ground. So everything's got to follow through. That's what we're aiming at. So there's two more diagonals that are worthy of note, and they're much harder to describe than they are to do. I think we've probably all done them, being more experienced fighters, but they're weird. So here I am, high right. Okay, what we're going to talk about is a cut that goes from high left to low right, but starts in high right here. And all that really means is, if I take my pommel and I aim it over here to the left, and then I start my cut with the front edge, by now it's starting to cut from high left towards low right, and it comes down into low right. So it starts at high right, and it actually comes high left to low right. It's actually a very comfortable movement once you get a feel for it. You can turn your shoulders a little bit to face your left side. That makes that cut even more difficult. And you can also do that from the left shoulder. You can turn to face the right and cut from high right to low left, even though you're starting from your left shoulder. It's worth talking about this high left position a little bit. you're going, why isn't that part of the SCA repertoire? And the primary reason for that is the shield. The shield's in your way, especially if you have a big strapped-on heater shield. It's really in your way. There's just no way you're throwing anything from there. That point that's so good for blocking with, it's in your way all the time. But the fact is we don't all fight with big heater shields anymore. So you really need to learn and understand this position, because depending on what you've got in your other hand, this may be a perfectly valid place to throw shots from. It's also a place that people end up momentarily. People who've got a nice slot shot over here, often what happens is they're here and they shift to here very momentarily on their way to throwing that slot shot. And what they're really doing is they're throwing out a high left, throwing a vertical shot and on out of high left. When we get into circles, we'll talk about that a little too. That should be all on one side instead of crossing over. All right. Yes?
Do you ever do the, going off the high right into the horizontal?
Well, yeah.
That's right, to the offside horizontal.
Yeah, it's the same motion as this one that we just covered. But yes. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I haven't really trained that exactly. Probably should add that to my notes. So yeah, like you mentioned, probably the more common usage actually from here, going from high right, is to shift to here and throw across. I guess part of the reason I don't cover it is when we get into circle theory, we're going to be dealing with figure eight transitions, and usually this is actually the beginning of a figure eight transition that leads to the other side, which gives you a few more options. We could continue to drill more and more obscure combinations of these positions and cuts. Instead, we're going to start talking about the circle theory. This will allow us to intuitively grasp many of the more obscure cuts, as well as transitioning from one guard to another. It also helps us add power to a variety of cuts. One of the great strengths of circle theory is that a great many subtle varied moves can be understood on a physical level without having to learn them all as separate moves. Circle theory ties all the moves together into a pattern and allows one to associate the proper power-generating body movements with the proper parts of the pattern without giving it detailed thought. After we finish circle theory, you'll benefit from backtracking and studying the simple cuts again, thinking about more as circles rather than just planes of striking. We'll want to apply circle theory's power-generating principles then and explore how board positions can provide a natural stopping point for the flow of the circle. These guards that we're talking about, that we're cutting from one guard to another, that's a natural stopping point where your sword just comes to a stop all on its own. You don't have to fight to stop it. And as we get into circular patterns, we'll find that that's a useful tool when you can stop the sword without straining. So, circle theory. Basic cuts have been taught as circular shots that trace part of the circle, stemming largely from the shoulder. So even what we're doing now, there's no denying that there is some circle involved here. It's a part of the circle, and the shoulder is the center of that circle as it comes across. We're going to return to those ideas later in the advanced class, but first we have to understand full circle shots and the establishment of flat planes of movement. To do this, we'll return to basic horizontal cuts. So we're going to do this first with the stick. Here. Okay, so we go one side and the other. So we're first going to establish it with the stick because that's nice and safe, and then we're going to pick up the whirligig for the first time and see if anyone loses themselves. So let's start out here in high right. Probably easiest to start out with your hand a little high on this one. We're just going to cut from high right across to high left, and then let it just keep going until it comes all the way back to high right. Come across until it stops being comfortable, let it flip over, comes all the way across to high right. It's a circular motion, rotating mostly around the circle of the wrist. Again, there's a little shoulder and body involved too. So the important thing here is one, that there's a follow through. Avoid lifting the elbow unnecessarily on this one. Keep the elbow down, allow it to turn at the wrist more. Think about keeping it nice and flat. We don't want it to get up like this. Try to keep it flat across there. We're going to talk more about that. Okay, so the same kind of motion for the offside shot. Start over here in high left. Kind of cut across until you're in high right. Let it flip over. Bring it all the way back around to high left again. And recycle the shot.
How far across do you bring your elbow? I have a tendency to bring my arm all the way across.
You get more shoulder power when you do that. It's not always necessary. We're going to talk about how far a sword needs to turn in a circle to generate power, and it all depends on certain circumstances. If If you're doing a short chop, you're going to need your shoulder over so you can get enough power. If you're turning it at the wrist and you've got 360 degrees of motion, you probably don't have to. And you can have a faster, more fluid shot without bringing the shoulder over. Just depends on the circumstance. All right. Okay, so I guess we'll cover that first. So, if anyone is struggling with this at all, one thing that'll help is to think about how you're holding the stick. If you're holding it like a hammer and you're holding it real firm, none of the circle stuff's going to work very well for you. You're going to get here and there's going to be this chunky spot where you try to flip it over. Ugh, it doesn't look like a circle at all. Let's do this. You got to relax the hand. For me, sometimes I'm gripping the sword mostly between my forefinger and my thumb. Other times I'm gripping the sword mostly between the pad of my hand and my little finger. It depends on where it's at in the circle. The important thing is to have a flexible grip that allows your sword to move smoothly through the motion. Whatever you need to do to get your hand, your wrist, your arm out of the way of that sword to allow it to move smoothly, that's what we're aiming at eventually, is learning how to do it. That can be a little different for each person, honestly, depending on how your physiology is. But the goal is to allow the sword to move smoothly without struggling against motion. So one of the things that we're aiming at is making it a full circle. We covered that pretty well. The flat plane is very important, and we want to avoid coning all the way around. I don't want it to leave the table and go into a cone. I want it to stay flat right on the table, so it's getting any longer. Right? That means you've got a flat plane of motion where the weight of the tip of the sword is moving naturally with centrifugal force pulling it around the center of that circle. Now that flat plane could be at any angle. It could be tilted this way, it could be tilted that way, it could be tilted this way even. But whatever angle that flat plane is at, and wherever the center of that table is, the sword needs to move in a flat plane skirting along the table. If you start to cone, so here we are on the flat table on top of my head again, right? If you start to cone like this, do this a little bit, you'll start to feel that centrifugal force keeps trying to pull it down. You actually have to have tension here to be able to move it around like this, whereas when you flatten it out, no tension. So that's what we're after, is the flat plane. So that seems pretty obvious. And so you wonder, why do people cone? Well, I've seen very advanced fighters even cone, especially under pressure. I found myself doing it all the time. And it happens when your conscious brain is going, I need to get there faster. I'm going to make the shortest distance between 2 points so I can hit my opponent faster. It all makes perfect logical sense, but it's not the way things really happen. So like if I'm here and I want to hit my opponent there, fastest point would be this, but I know that doesn't work. I know I need a circle, right? And so I end up with this funny compromise where it goes like this, and I try to hit the target. And that's coning. Here is what that shot should be doing. It should be moving, there's the table, it should be skirting along the table all the way to the target. That would be a nice, natural, flat shot. But it's a long 360-degree path to get there, right? My brain's going, no, hurry! But when you hurry, you don't have very good leverage on your weapon, which means you don't get it up to full speed. You're struggling against the weight the whole time. Honestly, it's going to take just as long or even longer to get your weapon to the target when you cone as it would to go all the way around the big circle. But when you get there, it may not be hard enough. You've exhausted your arm, you've strained your elbow, you've done a whole bunch of bad things. And because it's so inefficient, you're not relaxed and moving naturally. You're not going to be able to adjust that strike. You're really dedicated to what you're doing at that point. Rather, if you're taking the big circle, you're still loose. You're still loose back here. You can change your mind and go somewhere else. Whereas if you're doing this tight little cone, you got all that bad stuff happening and you've locked yourself into the blow you're going to throw. So what I always watch for is when I'm having a bad day and I feel like I'm not hitting hard or I'm feeling strain on my elbow, I look at coning's the first thing that I look for. Am I coning? Is that what's messing with my fight today? And often it is. And that's the thing to correct. So watch out for coning. I've seen plenty of advanced fighters get into coning from time to time. So it's time to go to whirly gigs. Those are the weights on the strings over there. Anyone else? Trying to hit yourself? Well, usually somebody hits themselves in the knee at some point in this class. It hurts a lot.
Let's go to a wall now.
Like a dinner table.
Oh, that's the camera.
Let's see. All right, so what this is it allows us to examine an analogous motion to how we should be throwing our sword. You cannot cone with one of these, right? Well, that's a plus right there. outside shot that came from high right, went to high left, and returned back to high right again. Okay, so we get it swinging around. I want you to notice some things as you're swinging this thing around. First of all, notice how your body tends to lean away from the weight as it goes around. When it's behind you, you tend to shift forward a little. When it's in front of you, you tend to lean back just a little bit. That little shift of weight. As long as we are throwing flat circular shots and swinging our weapon, we can apply these little principles like this to adding power to our shots. They're subtle little things. Notice also that your hand is pulling against the pull of the weight. So just like you're leaning back slightly when the weight's in front of you, your hand is actually starting to tuck back towards you as it comes around. And then your hand's moving forward a little as it comes around behind you. It's like our hand is doing a little circle, and the tip is doing a big circle, and the hand is moving a little sooner than the tip. It's like you're always leading it a little bit, leading it along, dragging it through the motion. Notice how a small, well-timed motion, little motion of the hand, can create a big effect out on the tip. This is true for a sword too, if you're moving in a circular fashion. Something else to notice is if you get it swinging moderately hard, that you may feel your hips shimmying a little bit. You've got a little bit of torso rotation going on. And I say little, it's a tiny little movement of the torso that's happening there. And that's as big as it needs to be to generate force in your sword blows. If it's timed right, and if you're moving your sword in a comfortable circular fashion rather than coning, it only takes us a little bit. We've all been trained originally with the big hip movement and throw, intentionally exaggerated, I think, usually, to teach that sword blow. In fact, one of the problems I think that new fighters can have is they look at an experienced fighter and they go, he taught me to move my hips, but I'm watching them, and I don't even see the hip movement. Well, it's probably still there, but just like swinging this thing around, it's really tiny, and it's timed to the blow just right, and that's all you really need. It does have to be there to generate maximum force, but it's really little. Something else to notice when we're swinging around here, along with that leaning that I was talking about of the body and the little movement of the hip, notice what it does to the balls of your feet. You can feel the bottoms of your feet pressing against the ground. As the weight comes around from your right towards your left, you should feel just a little bit of pressure with your right foot. And when it comes around behind you from left to right, you should feel a little bit of pressure in your left foot. You can kind of exaggerate that. Push down with the foot at the right time. So as it starts to come around on the right, push down with your right foot. As it starts to come around to the left, push down with your left foot. So you're kind of rocking a little bit back and forth between your feet. You notice just that tiny little pressure in your feet is generating more speed and power there to the hand and the rotation. Once again, a little thing makes a big difference. All right, so let's go do that offside. So we're going to swing from our left to our right with it across the top, just to feel the same things. Now and then, all important part where it's crossing in front of us and we'll be hitting our opponent, we're pushing with the left foot for the offside shot. And that's what speeds it up there. All the same things apply though. The little circular motion of the hand, the pressure in the feet alternating back and forth, the very slight shimmy of the hips, the leaning of the body backwards and forwards, opposite of where the weight is passing. All that stuff remains the same. All right. So, let's go back to the stick. We're doing a lot of the switching back and forth. So, there are differences between a whirligig and a stick. That seems like an obvious thing to say. One of the disadvantages of the stick, the thing that we all struggle the most with, is when you're holding a whirligig, at the point that you pinch that string, you've got a universally flexible joint. and that's awesome. When you're holding a stick, not so much. And that's what I was talking about. You've got to be able to alternate your grip and learn how to get your hand and your arm out of the way of your motion. And that's going to take some experimentation. Can't be too stiff or hang on to it too hard. It's not going to work. But what you want to eventually achieve is that same kind of universal joint where it's rotating comfortably. You know, and some of that's going to be rotating in the hand, and some of that's going to be rotation of the wrist, and a little bit of getting the body and the arm out of the way. All those things combined will give you an approximation of a universal joint up there where you're swinging. But that's what you're after, to really be able to utilize all those forces. This is where all those little things, like the pressure of the feet, the leaning, the little circle of the hand, all those things can generate enough force with your blows if you achieve a universal joint out of the hand and wrist. If you don't, then that's not going to work so well. Let's see. One of the big advantages of the stick over whirligig, however, is that it's easier to stop the darn thing. I mean, why don't we all fight with Morningstar? Well, they're illegal in the FCA. But there's a reason they weren't the most popular weapon in the whole wide world in real battle. Was they're hard to control. They're awesomely powerful in how hard they hit, but it's hard to stop its motion when suddenly you need to do something else, like cut to a different spot or defend yourself. So, advantages and disadvantages for the stick. So let's talk about applying some of these principles. Okay, so let's put the sword up here and highlight it. This is the part where you guys are going to have to do some thinking. Think back to when you were swinging the whirligig. And what we're going to be doing is throwing this horizontal shot, or horizontal shot comes around from high right, back around to high right again. Probably the easiest thing to start with is from here, as you start this forward motion, think about pushing down with the flat of your right foot as it goes across here. Just push down with that foot, and that's where the force comes from. Your hand can be right out here, and you can still generate force because you're pushing down there. You'll also probably naturally when you push down with that foot, you'll feel it drive your hips over a little bit. It's okay too, let that happen. Little motion of the hip. Don't worry about moving the hip, but when you drive the foot down, it's going to move your hip a little bit. The heavier your weapon is, you won't feel it as much with this, but with a heavier weapon, you'll feel it pulling this way, which means that as you're driving that foot down, you're going to lean away from it a little bit. So your shoulders might lean back a tiny bit as the blow comes out, and that will actually speed the tip up also. Yeah, we're going to have to trigger everything. Yes?
What about throwing in the opposite direction? I find a lot of times I throw, and then in order to relax and get my speed, I tend to drop, and then I have to grip again on that.
Yeah, I don't see that as a problem. That coning is in response to gravity. If you're relaxed, you'll tend to cone down. If you're up at maximum speed and you're relaxed, you won't cone down anyways at the point of the hit. So like if you're slowing down in the backfield, you're going to be coning because you're relaxed and gravity's pulling down on the weapon. But when you start to come up to speed here, it'll either flatten out, or if you've actually changed your angle, so you're actually throwing diagonal, you might stay down. At that point, you're not driving across as much as you're driving up at the diagonal with it. So once you're up at speed, downward coning won't happen because centrifugal force will lift it up flat to whatever actual plane and circle that you're using. When you slow down, it'll tend to go down. And I think that's a good thing, actually, because it's as good a time as any for this part of the lecture. I think the most neglected part of fighting is the wind-up. And some people go so far as to say you should never wind up because it throws graphs or shots. And I'm going to say just the opposite, that the wind-up is important and sets the foundation for your entire shot. There are schools of thought that you have to start in the position and have no telegraph, you throw directly from where you're at. And I've always kind of given a partial ear to that school of thought. Duchamp was a great example to me in that he likes to throw, he throws all the shots from back here. And if he can get away with it, he'll fight from here. But if he's being pressed at all, you'll see that he's up here blocking. Our game has gotten too complicated to take this risk most of the time. There's some really fast people out there. So the sword's up here blocking. But when he throws, he cycles it back to the shoulder before he throws. And you would think that that would make a telegraph. You'd say, oh, I see it coming. And it would stop. So it's a perfect example that even though, in theory, this says, hey, I'm going to throw a shot, and it takes time to get from here to here, that's all theory. In reality, it doesn't tell your opponent much. They don't know what blow's coming. They don't know for sure you're going to launch that shot. They just know you're getting ready for the shot. And frankly, it happens really fast. And the blow that comes from here is so much faster and more controlled than a blow that tries to launch from here that I think you gain back what you lost by having to shift from your forward guard to the shoulder as you start the shot. So going back to what I was saying about that, If you watch footage of people fighting, you'll see all the people all the way up to mid-range knights like myself tending to get to about here in the backfield before they throw their shot. If you watch the really top caliber folks, almost invariably, especially when they're on a good day, their sword is relaxing all the way, at least to here, sometimes all the way to here in the backfield before their blow starts. And yeah, it's happening all in one motion. You're like here, and it's like, they cycle back, and they throw their shot. But if you take it real slow, if you watch it, it's all the way to here, and the hand is relaxed, the tip starts to fall down here, and then the blow comes out. This all happens in one solid motion, and it's all really fast. But it's the fact, instead of going here, see how I made a column, and it was a little short? It's exaggerated. It's all the way back here, and it's relaxed. Everything is relaxed. Your body's relaxed, the hand's relaxed, and at this point, they're in an optimal position to add force to their blow and to choose a target. They can reevaluate. They could have been planning to hit here. If they get here, that target closed out. They can throw somewhere else. They have all kinds of options, and they're optimally set up to throw that blow somewhere. It's that relaxation in the wind-up that makes the real difference between absolute top caliber and just pretty good. So something to really think about. So long answer. All right, so we're going to come back to a bunch of stuff later, but let's lecture a little bit here. Power is delivered in your sword blows by involving as much of the body as possible in the sword blow, with priority given to the biggest muscles and masses. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about big motions, but I'm talking about little motions using the correct muscles. So, like with an onside shot, biggest muscle involved in an onside shot will be like the legs. So driving that foot down to the ground, that's using these giant muscles in the legs to generate power in your shot. That's awesome. You've got some big muscles in your torso, use those. With the onside shot, the pectoral muscle's fairly large. Use that to drive the shot across, bring things across like that. The very last thing are your arm muscles. They're hardly involved in that shot at all. They're really just guided. Use the big muscles to drive the shot. And the more of those big muscles involved, the better. Yeah, you could drive it just with the pectoral muscle if you're fairly strong. That's fine. But it's better if you use all the big muscles you can to line up your shot. And I'm not talking about using them in a big way, just in a little bit. Make sure they're involved. With the offside shot, the biggest muscle you don't involve in your offside shot, well, the first biggest one is your legs. Drive that foot into the ground. The next biggest muscle you got is the latissimus dorsi. That's this big muscle that attaches somewhere up here and reaches all the way across, down in here, down into the spine. That's like the muscle if you were in a gym, you're doing reverse flies, you're pulling back this way. That's that muscle, or rows, I guess. So use that muscle to pull your offside shot. If you think about what muscles pulling your shot across, it helps you generate power from your shot. And especially with the offside shot, they're talking about leaning away from the weight of the weapon. As it's coming across, if you're leaning backwards, you'll really feel that tip speed up. So that little backwards lean makes a big difference to your offside shot. Blow power is the result of speed and mass. Well-developed technique allows faster development of speed, and the weight on a string method allows the sword with more of its mass out of the striking end to be used well. Even a heavy sword with all its weight in the hand will not hit hard. Once again, this is a school of thought. There are schools that use lighter swords, heavier hands, and they rely on tremendous tip speed to hit hard enough for whatever caliber we're fighting in the kingdom. We need to hit pretty hard here. If you use a heavy sword, if I used a 10-pound sword, wow, I can really hit hard. Problem is, I'm not strong enough to get a 10-pound sword moving very fast, so I'm not going to hit that hard because that 10 pounds will move really slowly. So I got to find that optimal weight where as heavy a sword as I can move up to absolute maximum speed for my physiology in the time available to me for a regular blow. For me, that's somewhere between 2.5 and 3 pounds probably. Good technique allows you to use a somewhat heavier sword and still get it up to maximum speed without stressing yourself. And so that's where good technique gives you more power in your shot. You're able to handle the weight of the sword effectively without struggling against it, without that weight working against you. Instead, it's working for you. And you get up to your optimal sword blow speed, and you're delivering the mass of that weapon at that optimal speed. So that's what you're aiming at. I like a relatively heavy sword. I know in Ontario when you say heavy sword, we can be starting to talk about some real monsters. That's not really where I'm at. But I like a relatively heavy sword because I like to think that once I've got it up to speed, which happens right about here. At that point, I can forget about that sword. I can forget about that sword pull. I'm thinking about the next sword pull I want to throw, and getting my body in line so that when that sword stops on its target, I can start into my next blow. Because at this point, everything's been delivered. That's the mass of that sword as a maximum speed. It's going to hit with whatever force it's going to hit with. I don't have, as long as I get my hand loose, it's going to go ahead and deliver with it. I don't have to think about it anymore. My brain can go on to other things. With a lighter weapon, I'm still accelerating at this point, trying to get up to that speed that I need, that bullet speed, where this tiny little piece of lead can do all this damage. To get up to that bullet speed, I've got to continue to add speed to my weapon all the way to the target. And that's just a different kind of fight. My personal experience is that a somewhat heavier weapon, at which I've delivered optimal speed before it gets to the target, and I'm relaxed by the time it gets to the target. For me, there's less joint strain. Less strain on my elbow, less strain on my wrist when it hits. So I think there's advantages to longevity with that as well. So I think a slightly heavier weapon handled correctly with a circular style is easier on the body than a lighter weapon that has to move really faster. A training thing that you can work on with a laugh like this in a quiet room. If you swing your onside shot, you notice you can get a whoosh up front. The thing to work on is to see how slow you can swing it and still get the whoosh at the point of impact. The flatter your plane is, and the more you're applying those subtle principles of weighting your feet and letting your body turn a little, the easier it'll be to get that whoosh right out at the point of hitting, even though you're moving pretty slow. What that means, what that whoosh is representing is hitting maximum speed right in front of you where you're hitting, and otherwise moving fairly slow and relaxed. So it's not about trying, anyone can swing it really hard and fast and get a whoosh, but learning to swing it slow and relaxed and still get that little whoosh, that's a way of training yourself to be relaxed on your shots. One last thing to talk about while we're working on these horizontal shots is the wrap shot, onside wrap shot. There are lots of little variants, and we'll go back and talk about a couple of those. But the simplest variant that relates best to what we're talking about with circular sword blows is normally here's our onside shot, comes across cutting edge, cuts through the opponent, starts to get a little uncomfortable, we let it turn over. Notice when we turn it over, we don't do this, we turn it right on its axis, so it stays along the flat plane and comes to here. So our wrap, it's going to get to right about here. We've already reached optimal speed at this point. Once again, rotating it right on its axis, so now the back head is leading. Not turning it like this, just rotating it on its axis, and then allowing it to continue its circular motion for the shoulder. That makes a nice, easy wrapping shot. I don't know if I have later on my notes or not, so let's go ahead and cover this too before I forget. That kind of a motion here is probably the most comfortable wrap in the world. If you'll start here, either in high right or low right, either one's fine actually. We're going to throw a wrap to the leg coming up at a diagonal. So when it gets to about the hip, you allow it to turn over. Now we're getting to the back edge. It's going to hit, and it's going to continue all the way on up to high left. Okay, so it's a nice, relaxed swing. In some ways, this is easier than the front edge cut from low right. So get that nice, easy swing. Now, to put more power on that, we're going to drive our right foot down. But it's a good long swing. It's not hard to generate enough power on this. And part of the reason it's not hard to generate enough power on this is because of the follow through coming all the way here. You think about batters, when they do this, what is that with a bunt? When they pull all the way to here, that's going for a home run, right? It's having the follow through that makes a difference in how hard you can hit. Now, admittedly, it's probably going to stop in your leg if you hit the target. It's not going to make it here. But it's the fact that your body was set up and pulling all the way from here that gives it power to spare. And that allows you to stay very relaxed with this motion. Now here's the good part. This is such a relaxed, easy motion that you can actually cheat a little. Come to poetry. You get to right here, if you shift a little, you're losing power because you're cheating, right? So it becomes, it's really, really important that you're still pulling for this right shoulder. Now you notice, when I do this, there's the left shoulder, and when I go for the head, still going to the same place. So the completion of that shot is the same, whether it's a leg or a head. The coolest thing about this is, you can make that decision, because it's so relaxed, you can make that decision right here. So you start your motion, and right about here, if they block the leg, you lift the hand, if they don't block the leg, go ahead and let it hit the leg, pulling from the shoulder. All you're really thinking about is how are they responding and getting that sword to the shoulder. So drive the foot, get it in motion, and then think about the shoulder you're going to, and then watch, see where the target is, and hit it. Nice relaxed shot. Okay. So at this point, we've covered the very root foundations of circular sword blows. We've got the fundamental core circle theory. We're going to step back into foundations and work on thrusting a little bit. Please keep in mind that in the advanced class, which we're going to cover today actually, we'll continue to develop circle theory. We're going to cover the following items. You can let your brain think about these before we get to them. We're going to talk about throwing flat plane circular shots at a variety of angles instead of just flat across. We're going to use a figure-8 pattern to tie circular blows into fluid combos. We're going to add more power to our blows based on upward and downward movement. We're going to understand the options and opportunities that arise when we hit our opponent's sword or shield, stopping our natural flow. We're going to refine our understanding of circles to include circles based on different joints of the body. We're going to sort of talking generalized circles, and how to transition between them. We're going to learn about a crucial difference between first blows and the rest of the blows. When the sword is just starting its motion from the still point, it's really quite different than all the other circular motions. We're going to get into detail on that. We're going to talk about the fundamental principles of defense and learn to locate our blocks along our offensive patterns. So, any questions on what we've covered so far before we move into thrusting for a while?
So when you're talking about circles, like you really touched on it with the rack, from the low rack to the high rack. You said move using your hand. Do you ever throw the same? I find myself when I'm throwing a circle and it's coming fast, using my hand to control the angle is harder than shifting. And you're throwing the same circle, shifting the angle of the anchor. You get the change.
Yeah, probably the reason I don't do that is I have a really bad lower back. But that makes sense. And you're using bigger muscles and a bigger mass to change it rather than the littler muscles of the shoulder and the hand. Yeah, and there's a lesson there. Different physiology, slightly different application, but the principle and the goal are the same, and the result is the same. It's just a different physiology. That's going to be true for getting your sword to move circularly smoothly too. Everybody's going to be a little different in the hand, and the wrist, and the elbows. So yeah, that's a perfect analogy way to do it, I think. I think also using, we'll talk about it a little later, but the compass step thing, using the steps to drive changes can work really well too. All right, so thrusting. We know that swords are clearly used for thrusting in the 14th century, as this technique features prominently in the 133 manual. In truth, the points on swords and references in older stories would indicate that thrusting has been a part of swordsmanship since very early on. Perhaps even more so with thrusting than with cutting blows, it's important to have a stable and rehearsed guard position from which to launch the attack, something physically familiar. Similar to cutting, these are not positions to be posed in, but rather they are known positions through which the swordsman moves his or her sword on the way to launching a thrust. Having these rehearsed positions increases accuracy in thrusting and allows one to practice the transition from cutting blow to the thrust. Many of the techniques illustrated in the 133 manual include a thrust. Several ready-to-thrust positions are illustrated and several are implied. We will cover these and a few that I've added for completeness. The added ones are drawn from my own experience, and I found in some of the later period manuals. Before we start thrusting, it should be noted that the sword arm should never lock fully straight at the end of the thrust. Always thrust in a slightly bent position, stopping under your own power. Do not rely on hitting your target to stop your thrust. This is done to protect your elbow. Unlike cutting, the thrusting action will not have so much momentum and leverage against your joints as to necessitate a follow-through of the circular path. So if I do this and try to stop my sword, all that momentum and leverage against my joints puts a lot of strain on me. But doing this and stopping, most people's bodies are completely up to that task without hurting themselves. But if you go all the way to your joint locks, you're going to hurt that elbow. The temptation is to get lazy and rely on hitting something to stop that tip, and you keep your arm nice and relaxed. Problem is, if you miss that relaxation, you can hit on into your joint box out and there's pain. So what I recommend is that you practice your thrusting to that slightly bent position, whether you hit something or not. So if there happens to be a head in the way, great, you pasted them in the face. If there doesn't happen to be a head in the way, you still thrust in the same position and return into your motion. It's the same thrust whether there's something in your way or not. And that trains you to defend an elbow. It also gives your body an understanding of what happens after the thrust. Because thrusts are awesome, but there is a tendency to be exposed defensively after the thrust. And part of the reason for that is being unclear on what your body does after the thrust when your opponent isn't dead. Okay, so positions to thrust from. First position comes right out of the 133 manual. I call it right couch, and I'll explain why. That's from here. And in the 133 manual, you'll see them out there with the buckler held out here near the tip. The application there is you're denying your opponent the ability to knock the tip of your sword out of line with their sword and control your sword by having your buckler there to actually defend hitting your sword. What I really like about right couched is you actually raise against your body, which gives you control over just having your tip hanging out there and leverage against you. Some refinements on right couch. The reason I'm calling it right couch is it's like couching a lance. The palm is up, the weight of the weapon is resting on the palm, like it's tucked under your arm, and it's just resting right there, except for you're holding the grip of the sword. With a Quillian sword, the Quillian actually forms a T against the body, which gives you even more stability, which is awesome. Something else interesting about this is if you're doing it right, it puts your elbow, your hand, and the tip of your sword all in one line. There's a straight line all the way from the elbow to the tip of the sword. If you've got a key like this, your accuracy will be good. If it's all in line, your accuracy will be very good. An interesting thing about this, modern fencing has evolved out of this position. Their weapons are a lot lighter, but the alignment remains the same. Line from tip to elbow, modern fencing comes out of here, same alignment from elbow to tip. It gives you a lot of natural control on the tip of that weapon. With a heavier weapon, this is a little cumbersome and unwieldy, and it's prone to getting deflected and its mass working against you. So retreat it back to the body to keep that same alignment. You'll have the same accuracy with your hits, and you'll be able to protect the tip of your weapon. Right couch is one of the few ones that you can pose in because you've got this ability to cover the tip of your weapon. You've got a lot of control on it, so you can threaten someone in that position if you want. So far, it sounds awesome. Like it's the most awesome thrusting position ever. And I do like it, but there is one big problem. The problem is that your opponent's shield is right there on the side that you're threatening with your thrust. You don't have a lot of target available to you where you can thrust easily from that position. And that's a major problem with it. So that's why even in the 133 manual, this isn't referred to as the preferred thrust, even though it's noted as being a very good one. So let's talk about other positions. Left couched is similar, except for it's over here on this side. And you can see how you're not going to be able to stand around and pose in this one, but it's a position that you might move into very briefly. Like if I take my opponent, I can retreat my sword here and make a thrust from that position. This actually leads to what they call the preferred thrust. And the preferred thrust against a right-handed opponent drives between their sword and their shield into that factor. They're standing here, shield, sword, here it's coming from that side. Not the shield side, the sword side, in the actual opening. So it has a real advantage there as far as having a target. You get to that position from Iron Chicken, probably hit it down, make the thrust. Depending on the kind of shield you have, I think a strapped-on heater shield would totally get in the way of doing this probably. Any kind of center grip shield, I think you can probably comfortably get out of your own way temporarily. Certainly with the buckle. Another interesting position is left hip. That's down here. Certainly a big strap-on shield would be in your way with this one. But there'll still be moments, like you've come in, you've thrown here, and you've just got this moment where you can draw it there and make the thrust. And typical of a lot of thrusting, like I said, don't pose in the ready to throw position. You're drawing back to that position momentarily just to get everything in line and making your thrust and then you get the heck out of it. Because if you come around like this, you hit yourself dead. But once again, this is hitting into that preferred thrust zone over on the side. Another thrusting position would be, I like to call it the Roman, just right along the right hip. Could be all the way up here, could be all the way down near the knee even, but you can certainly brace it against your body, and it's just a thrust coming off the low right side. Something to think about with these thrusting positions is how to get to them from your basic guards. So like from here, you draw to there, you draw to there, and you draw to there. I can even draw down here. Same from here. All of these, you can get to thrusting positions relatively quickly. One of the most interesting transitions, and it's emphasized in the 133 manual as being kind of the universal way to get to your thrusting position, is, believe it or not, low right. For them, it's down here. For me, it's up here. But from here, it's a natural swinging motion to come up into right couch, come up to the right hip, and interestingly enough, even to come to low left. Let's treat this and pretend it's a big war shield hanging right here, right? If I'm doing a left leg lead, since this transitions right along the face of my body, this pendulum action from low right, or I could even be up here higher up and drop through low right, I can actually come up inside my own shield and up into that outside thrust without hitting my own shield. You would think that this would be in the leg, but because it's moving parallel to the face of the body, this is actually a natural swinging motion. And what is it? This was a surprise to someone to get thrust there in a war. Unfortunately, it's so much of a surprise that they may not notice or know what they were hit with. But it is really neat. One thing to be aware about this, though, you'll notice that if I'm relying on sword blocking for my next defense, that is not going to happen. So that is a danger to that. Okay, so one last thrusting position. I just call it the scorpion. It's coming over the top. Once again, from back here, if you're dropping in the low right, a real natural transition up into the over the head thrust. If I'm coming straight over the head, I like to turn my palm up. To me, that feels most comfortable and the most controlled. I also like this from an angle over here on the side, especially against a kneeling opponent. Coming over the side like that provides a nice way to pass the shield. It feels pretty comfortable. I don't know why I can use more stand. It's really comfortable. Okay, so of all the thrusting ready positions, we talked about that. Right couch would be a good one to pose in if you're going to pose in a thrusting position. Something else that's emphasized in 133 is called long point. It's actually put in there as one of the guard positions, but I've held up until this point telling about it. Some of the subtle positions will be in my sword buckle class. Sword point is the position you end up in at the end of a thrust, or at the end of an attack that stops the inner-arm opponent. This significant point is explicitly noted in 133. The student is advised to give extra attention to its study due to that simple fact. You always end up in long point. Long point is this. There are variants, depending on how you got there. But it's something where your tip is out, your hand is extended, and you think about that. After the thrust, you end up out there somehow, out in long point. After a cut that stops your opponent, there you are again, out in long point. When we start talking more about circular shots, we're going to see how we can throw a circular blow from here to just about any target. So there's lots of cutting things we can do from long point. The other thing to think about right now with long point is you made this cut that is stopped at long point, or you made a thrust that is stopped at long point. Think about how you draw back to one of your thrusting positions from long point and reapply another thrust. One last thing to talk about thrusting, they call it winding the blow, or winding. The idea being you thrust along a particular angle and they blocked it. Rather than retreating the thrust and making another thrust, once it has stopped in their defense, changing the angle and driving it down into a different angle. If you try to thrust down here and block it with the round ship, change the angle and continue the thrust. And that goes way back.
So the right couch position, since the shield is right there usually, when would you use that? Would you use that like a Florentine or,
Well, sword and buckler, you put the buckler right next to the point of the shield to the sword. I think it works with a full-size shield. Can I use the heater filter here? I can use the heater very often, sometimes not the shield will work. But I know it works with the full-size Senator round. Yeah.
No, I mean, but on your opponent, right? Like your opponent's shield's going to be there.
Because of all the defense there?
Right.
It is not ideal because they've got a shield in the way. However, you've got so much control with that pull Q action right here that they cannot ignore it. If they're right here, you're not getting it.
Right.
You know? But if they're giving you this kind of a thing, they're in trouble. You can force them not to do this thing that they like to do by threatening with that because you've got enough control from that position to make that thrust and to sit there ready to make that thrust without really putting yourself in any particular danger. A good thing to think about from here too is how to roll off into defense from there in case they just go on the offensive. But it is such a valid threat that even though they've got all their defense on that side of their body, they still have to address it in some fashion, which is interesting.
It's still a legitimate counter, right? I mean, even if it may be suppressed from the attack, but it's not suppressed from the defensive motion. If your opponent steps into you, now you have whatever comes over. If they step around, you make the shot here, right? So maybe it's not strong offensively, but it's not standing counter.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because the opponent steps and creates those movements.
And a way of controlling your opponent's options without being covered.
What's the counter, like Iron Chicken?
I think personally, if I was faced with it, probably I'd give myself good coverage and probably start rotating until the person got bored. Let's see. So, things to explore on your thrust. And like I said before, these notes are available online, so you can review this stuff on your own later. But move from any of the basic guard positions to any of the thrusting positions. Obviously, the more comfortable you can get from any one to the other in all those many variations, the more versatile you'll be. Shift from any thrusting position to any of the basic guard positions. That's being ready to thrust and then changing to being ready to cut instead. Shift from any thrusting position to any other thrusting position. So you threaten here, but you shift here before actually making your thrust. Draw back from a cutter thrust ending in long point in any thrusting position. We talked about that from here, drawing back to one of the other position. So I might make my thrust from here, from right couch, draw back to left couch, and rethrust from left couch into the actual movement. Draw back from long point to any guard position. Let's see. After thrusting, throw a circular blow from long point without withdrawing the sword. I'm not going to show you that, we're going to go back to it later. That's kind of the key, one of the key advantages of the circular style is the ability to do that. One last note on thrusting accuracy. It's often difficult to develop accuracy with thrusting with the sword. Using rehearsed thrusting positions to start from will help with that, giving your body a known position. Another difficulty in thrusting accurately with the sword arises from a mental misconception. When we think about thrusting at something, it's natural to think like we're poking at it with our index finger. You reach out and poke a light switch or whatever. That's not an analogous action to thrusting with a sword. A sword does not stick out in line with your forefinger generally. That's not a comfortable way to hold your sword when it comes to cutting. So it ends up sticking out either like a hammer out at a straight angle like this, or more realistically, probably at an angle like so. So we need to sort of train our mind away from the thrusting with your thumb. Not like this, unless you hold your sword like a hammer, but probably more like this, where it's kind of coming at an angle to your hand. You can actually improve your eye-hand coordination and thrusting if you walk around like this and poke things with your thumb. Now the first thing you'll notice is, unlike the forefinger, it's kind of the same all the way across here. With the thumb, when I get over to here, I got to turn it over to be able to make it pose. Maybe there it is. So it's just something to start thinking about. That's a way to start teaching your body by definition a circular motion. You can't come with one of these things. So it becomes the litmus test for whether a motion works or not. So this is where people hit themselves in the knee. So downward figure eight is what we're going to work on first. This ties your diagonal from the high right to the low left, and your diagonal from the high left to the low right, all together into one pattern that doesn't require a stop. So that's this sort of thing. I think it helps to kind of lead the motion with the hands. The hand moves through a small figure eight, and that makes the whirligig move through the motion. It also seems to help to turn your body side to side, helps guide you from cranking your knee. You should still feel the same push on the feet as you transition from one direction to the other. It does not drive the force of the shot the same way that our horizontal shot did. We'll talk about another way to add force to these later. But mostly we're just establishing this path, establishing the fact that even though we're deviating slightly from a flat circle, this is still an adequately circular motion to move through. So that's the main lesson we're after here. Let's go ahead and pick up our sticks and move them with that. We're going to put back and forth a lot between the sticks and the whirligigs for a bit here. So starting from high right, that means a cut down towards low left. And when it rises to low left, it keeps on moving on up to high left, cuts down towards low right, keeps on moving up to high right, and it's just that figure eight motion here. All the cuts are with the front edge of the weapon. And just let it turn over in the backfield as necessary to bring the front edge to line up. One thing to think about with cuts is that you want to get the edge of the weapon that you're going to be striking with, especially when it's a front edge shot, aimed in the direction of that flat circle that you're going to throw as early on as possible, so that you're not trying to generate motion forward at the same time that you're trying to line your edge up. Do a little aside here. This is something that Sean talks about from the shoulder, is that he turns the hand over like this before he does anything. Then the hips fire, the body turns, and the hand comes out, all that stuff. But he puts the edge in line with the angle of attack first. And I do recommend that no matter what. I'm talking about a lot of different angles now, all these diagonals and things. But even so, when you're in the backfield and you're lining up that angle and you know where the sword's going to go, at that point, that edge should be lined up with the direction of travel really early on. You shouldn't be still adjusting your edge as you're starting to force with your blow. So there's our downward figure eight. Easy enough. We transition from side to side. So let's go back. Again, remember that it's a front edge cut. You can come from the right towards the left, front edge cut. Some people have a real tendency coming up from low right to high left to turn it to the back edge. And that's okay for the wrap. We talked about that wrap shot. But learn to cut it to the front edge. And the reason you want to learn how to train this with the front edge is mostly because it really sets up the motion for this offside shot over here. It's a variant of this upward figure eight that most folks use to set up a good grip shot on the offside. And actually, this part of the figure eight is kept a little small and tight, but it sets up the strike here. It's the same thing as this big upward figure eight. It's just the first part is small and tight to the body, and the last part opens up and reaches for the target. Alright, so that's upward figure eight motion. Let's talk about some ways of adding power to our figure eights. For the downward figure eight, and really for any downward sloping shot, one of the easiest ways to add power to your shot is to drop your body weight into it. And what I mean by that is, if you're in the high position, we might be able to train this cutting, say high right or low left to begin with. So we're standing here, stand with your knees slightly bent, like you usually do when you're actually fighting. As you begin your blow, your first power of your blow, relax your knees. If you relax them completely, they stay relaxed, you're going to fall all the way down to your knees. But we're not going to let that happen. You're just going to totally relax them and then catch yourself after you've dropped about a foot. But during that time, when your body weight is dropping, that's when you're beginning to pull on your weapon. And all that weight of your body should translate into pulling force on the weapon. So any shot that has a downward trajectory to any degree can be greatly increasing force by just relaxing the knees. Feel So upward figure eight, as you might imagine, we're going to start with our knees bent, and we're going to drive the knees up. We're just going to push with our feet. This is a lot more like what we were talking about with the horizontals, where we're pushing with one foot or the other foot to drive ourselves sideways. And in fact, with the upward figure eight, you can not only drive the upward force of the figure eight, but also drive the diagonal direction by pushing a little harder with the foot that's on the side that the sword is coming from. So if I am in low right and I'm headed to high left, I'm going to be pushing up, straightening my knees slightly as I throw the blow, but I'm going to push a little harder with my right foot into the ground than with my left foot. What that's going to mean is not only am I going to come up, it's going to drive my body this way a little bit. And that supports the blow. And then of course coming the other way, I'm going to drive harder with my left foot than I am with my right foot. And that drives me across that way. This can actually be exaggerated. David likes this one, comes out of a skating background, is as he drives diagonally from low right towards high left, he actually pushes so hard with the right foot that it drives a step off to the left. And then as he's going from low left to high right, he drives across from the left foot towards the right. So he's actually stepping with the blows. And all of that leg push is in the direction of the sword travel. Yes, all right. I don't know if I can deal with that. Yeah, I can deal with that. So we'll deal with that. Okay, so what we've got is downward blows allow us for a downward angle from the right, alternating with a downward angle from the left. That's all fine and dandy. Everything ties together. It's all circular. We don't have to stop the motion to go from one to the next. But we need to add some unpredictability. We're always going to here, there, and there, and there. What we're going to do. So we're going to talk about some ways of making it unpredictable, what we're doing next without sacrificing flow. One of the things that you can make things less predictable is, here we are in a downward figure eight. I could double through. So I've established this diagonal plane, and I continue to come along that plane. So I might go from right to left, left to right to left, right to left again, right to left again, left to right. I can always double one of those lines of striking. So they know that they're going to be downward diagonal shots, but what they don't know now is whether it's going to move to the other side or continue to hit on the side it was. When you're using circular blows, one of the things you notice now is it's always possible to repeat the blow that you threw. If you throw a blow along an angle, you can always throw it right along the same angle to the same location indefinitely, really, once you've established the angle. There's no line there. Just pull it right around and back into the target.
Can you relax, with this technique, are you going to be able to relax your hand to get things that where you're striking through and you relax the hand and let it fall as you put your hand through?
I tend to have the hand guide the point I'm at. try some things with the whirligig. So let's start with the downward figure eight, I guess. We'll move through all the possibilities there. So we're in the downward figure eight. Practice doubling for a while. You have your diagonally establish that plane of motion, and then take that plane of motion and turn it back into a figure eight again. And try it from the other direction. Establish the plane of motion, diagonal across the front end, and then back into a figure eight again. Now, something a little different. Keep it all along one side of your body. Now you've got a vertical plane. It's like that table is resting against the side of your body. You're just cutting straight down along the side, and then you can go back into your figure eight and go straight along the other side. Now this feels pretty comfortable. This is your slot shot over here. It's a circular motion along the side of your body, and it can transition directly over. You can work it over a little bit and turn it into a diagonal, back to a vertical along the side, back to a diagonal, turn the diagonal, and turn it into a figure eight, get it going the other way. Yep, there it is over here. So now we've got a little added complexity. We can double our diagonal, or we can double our vertical on one side, and then pull it back into our figure eight. That is me not
Trying to lower transition.
Alright, so there's the complexity. Let's play around with that a little bit for the upward figure eight too. How are you getting the angle now? I feel like I'm waiting to make the angle. Let's see, I bring the whole elbow over. You kind of move. You're talking about staying vertical along the side. So I'm kind of circling around my elbow. This is imagine a hipster standing there in a zoot suit to watch. It's a little, of course, with everything you pick up the stick, it's a little different. I got that angle now. That's at an angle. Oh, you're doing it downward. That's okay. As with all of these, your hand moves in a little circle along the angle, and that makes the string move a bigger circle. And with all this stuff, you'll find you kind of like turning your shoulders or move your elbow to get things in a place where it's got the center it needs to move. And that's sort of a self-exploration sort of thing, figuring out how your body moves. People are all different as far as that goes. All right. So that's something that you guys can work on more on your own time. There's lots to explore there. The other thing to explore is adding power to those. So on the stick, remember that when they're going downward, you're going to be dropping weight on it during the point of impact. With the upward motion, you're going to be raising up your knees to add power when it comes across the target. So what we're after there is unpredictability. And we've added some unpredictability by doubling up on the side or doubling up on the diagonal. So now we're going to talk about other ways that your pattern can be altered without having to use your muscles and joints to stop the motion of your sword. The easiest way to alter the pattern and stop the motion of your sword without straining yourself is to hit something. And immediately, there's an opponent standing in front of you. You can hit them in the head or you can hit them in the shield. Doesn't matter what you get. One of the things that happens is your sword stops. It's whatever diagonal or figure eight pattern you were in. You have now been relieved of the necessity to continue that particular motion, and you have the opportunity to relaunch your sword in a new direction. And this may look familiar. Anything out here is basically long point. You're ending up with your sword pointing out away from your body. So now that we're talking about circular motions and thinking about centers and circles, you've got the situation where your sword tip is out there pretty much where you want it to be at the end of your next motion. So you can establish a circle centered mostly around the wrist, a little bit of elbow, that traces from this position 360 degrees back out there to hit your opponent somewhere. So a simple application of this might be flat horizontal plane. So here we are, 360 degrees, back to the same spot. This is the old brick rack. This is going to look pretty familiar to people. Boom, boom, With a moderately heavy sword and good body dynamics, you should be able to hit hard enough even around here for the 360 degree rotation. If you have less than 360 degrees, maybe not so much, just but frankly, that will usually be enough. Once again, all the dynamics, right? You're pulling back against the weight. You're powering by pushing with your feet. Since we're doing a flat plane here, we can't drop or raise our knees much, but we can lean away from the force. Remembering that a small motion of the hand generates a big motion on the tip. All those things put together allow us to deliver force in a 360-degree motion like that. Now, this is the one we're all familiar with, but the fact is, when you're out here, you can set this angle up in any direction. So from here comes this way, from here comes this way, could come around this way, could come around that way. You can hit any of the angles in a 360-degree arc once you're here. This is a real moment of opportunity. When you're out at Long Point, you've got a 360-degree turn to any place. Now, the thing that takes a little while to get used to is if I want to hit there, I have to start out by moving this way, or moving away from it. If you take your target, you feel the angle and the circle that's involved, and then everything traces along that circle to the target. I want to, I'm on his leg is here. I want to get over there and trace the circle around to there. It's all a big circular motion. And you don't have to retreat the hand back to the shoulders with these because you've got a 360-degree arc available. You can retreat the hand. What that does allow for is you get back here, still one motion, right? It's still a circle, and the center is somewhere sort of here. It's a compromise between the wrist and the shoulder as to what circle's going on here. This gives me the advantage of being able to stop it if I want. Maybe change my mind and go somewhere else, or to put a hinge in it. I get it here, not open, not open, not open. There it is, bam. So there are some advantages to retreating it, but sometimes you've got it out here, and you're behind your shield. You don't want to come back to this side of your shield. Leave your hand on that side of your shield, tilt the circle and drop it in. You can actually spin it right around your wrist as long as you keep that flat plane and remember what your dynamics are. That could be an interesting leg thing too. You can be like here on the leg, you can flip and hit the other leg. If someone's squared up against you, you can be there, you can flip to the other leg. Flat plane right in front of yourself. All right. Okay, so some things to think about. We've hit the target. One way to think about it is you can reverse, you stop on the target, you can reverse the motion, and I can come absolutely opposite of where you were. So if I hit the downward diagonal here, I can reverse it to the upward angle here. That's one way to think about it. I can also hit the target, relax the hand, and draw through, and hit the same target again. That's repeating the diagonal. It's just like doing this, except for I'm actually hitting something, and I'm making the decision. Relax the hand, pull it through, and hit again at the same angle. So that's always an option too. So you can either hit and go somewhere else, or you can hit and pull through and strike again at the same zone.
Hey, Rooston, is there advantages, disadvantages to going clockwise or counterclockwise? You know what I mean? Like, you can throw the same shot, like you can do backhand this way, or you can do a backhand, you know what I mean? Like, or, you know what I mean?
I'm not getting that.
So if I'm going to come clockwise, right, I'm going to go here. If I'm going to go counterclockwise, I'm going to, let's see, I know I can do this. Go here? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you can decide to come down or up, you know? Like,
So onside or outside?
Basically, she's talking your recovery, but you're recovering to the same side and you're recovering to the opposite side.
I mean, they're both circles, but
Versus that. Well, it depends on where the opening is going to be, I suppose, really. I mean, as far as the body is concerned, they're both equally valid. I think you're talking about, like if I'm here, am I going to hit and pull through this way and continue to move? I guess that's clockwise. Or am I going to hit and then reverse and hit back along the angle?
well, yeah, I mean, but you could throw a snap either way, right? So counterclockwise this way, clockwise this way,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
or this way.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. What's happening on that second return is what you're really doing is you're taking a piece of the figure eight. Okay, so here's
Okay.
my downward figure eight. And what's happening is I'm interfering with the figure 8 here, and instead of continuing on this way, I'm deflecting off into this part of the downward figure 8 here, and that's all it is returning along that side of the figure 8. And it works because it's stopping on something there, it's hitting something, and so instead of having to follow through to that side of the figure 8, it's returning on this side of the figure 8. And that can go the other way too. It can be upward and return along the upward figure 8.
To me, it feels like when you pull it back and let it come under, there's better acceleration than if you go this way. You know what I mean? Like, the acceleration just seems better.
Yeah, I think it depends on physiology.
Okay.
That's true for me too,
Yeah.
more comfortable.
This
But an addendum to that would be Duke Uther has a short return on that side.
I've seen that.
That's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
I can't do it, unfortunately, yet, but I am
Okay.
working on it. And that is a downward and
Yeah.
then shorten up to fire off the shoulder.
You have to
again.
be able to control the angles that you create by that short return. This return is one angle.
Yeah, I've come to favor the upward
Right.
return on the slide, but that downward return, not only does it date back to the old Bellatrix
Right.
return of the shoulder sweep, but Uther's taken it and turned it into a fluid, short teardrop return.
Okay.
All right. Okay, other things that we can do when we've ended up at long point, because we've stopped and hit something, is you can front stop, pull back one of your thrusting positions and thrust from there. Or, remember winding, whack, hit the top of their shield, change the angle, and then thrust right from where it's at, never retreat the point, leave it out there. You can even play some mind games with that, you whack and just kind of leave it there. And then, that's hard, right? And you've got options. From here, you can spin a shot, or if they get lazy, you can land a thrust in. And it can be unnerving for them to wonder why your sword's lying out there on the shield for a while. You can practice with a partner too, with firing a shot from long point. It's kind of a dangerous drill. I'm just going to demonstrate it. Decide whether you want to do this some other time. You want to hang on to the gate, and when hang on to it a little bit. When I tug, let it come out of your hands. Okay. And when I tug, take a step back. Here we go. So you get that sense of pulling it away from long point, that little tug at the beginning, and then returning it, and that ties into our discussion we'll have later about first blow, where you're starting from a dead position when the sword's not in motion, and putting it into motion. But it gives you that sense of how to generate power from long point in a circular motion. And the power generation usually begins right at the beginning as you make that tug. If you're going to leave the hand down, if you ever return the hand all the way back to the shoulder with that bigger motion, you have other options. You can actually stay relaxed until it gets to here, and then make a choice before you generate power. They both have their moments. Okay. Yes?
Those options, that's how you see that just change the plane with the hand return. If your hand's out there, you can plane you're doing a 360 in that plane, but if you pull your hand back, the choice of changing to a different plane.
Yeah, you have removed one out. You've removed the option of leaving your hand in that position if you have an advantage in the game, if you're behind their shield. You've lost that option now because you pulled your hand back. But you gain the ability, one, to kill the motion of the sword here and completely redirect, or to put a pause in and wait for the opening to happen before line. Or you can go, is it still advantageous to risk throwing a shot, or should I just back off? What's going on? That moment of decision as it returns back wide.
I was thinking from the shot here, you're going to return and stay in plane, strike it down into the shield, and return, bring it horizontal plane.
Yes, yeah, that's where the poetry comes in. You can't see a little.
rules.
Yeah. It's one of its advantages.
Where's the circle from horizontal leg back? Top of your finger that way?
Let's see here. We don't touch the ball. With leg cuts, it's not always horizontal, it's one thing. One of the ways you can look at it, I think we deal with this later, is you hit, you can make that part of the figure 8. Well, we're gonna yeah, okay, that's fine. So you can hit, and since it's stopped, you can just draw it back to low right and repeat. Or you can draw it through to low left and cut this way. That's if it's truly a horizontal leg shot. A lot of leg shots are slightly figure-eighted. So here's the leg shot. It's basically a horizontal shot, but it's got this upward trajectory to it, which means that I can pull through and throw along the figure-eight pattern into my next blow. So even though it is essentially a horizontal leg shot, it's got a little bit of diagonal to it, and that sets up what the next shot's going to be. Or downward diagonal, you can set up that for a return. The truly horizontal is probably going to go back and end in one of the guards, I suppose. Or go into part of the figure-eight, somewhere in the middle here. Okay, so reversing from a guard. This is the next way that you could stop your figure-eight action and go into something less predictable. So here we are, let's say you're down figure-eight. At the end of the guard, what's really happening here is I'm cutting from high right to low left, and then I'm lifting to high left and cutting from high left to low right. When you think of figure-eight, you don't really think in those terms. And in a way, that's good. That's where the fluidity and the continued motion comes from. But the fact of the matter remains that you can still stop there without any strain. Or you could let it go up here and stop here without any strain. So as it passes through those guards, high right, low left, high left, you can stop the sword at that point without any significant strain. And then anything that you could have done from that guard that you stopped in becomes available to you. So if I am in a downward figure-eight, and I stop down here in low left, I can reverse and start an upward figure-eight starting from low left. Or down here in low right, I can reverse and start an upward figure-eight from that there without any strain. So any time that you pass through those positions in the back, guard position, you have that opportunity to halt your motion and reverse, or just halt your motion and then continue it. That's just putting a hitch in it where it changes the timing. All right, so okay, so another way to reverse directions on our motions is going from upward to downward by dragging down. I like symmetry. I like to say you can do it up, you can do it down, you can do it right, you can do it left. In this case, I don't really believe there's true symmetry, but it works so good I have to bring it up. So if you're moving in an upward figure-eight pattern, at the top of that figure-eight, right here, you can just drop your weight, that's like you never downward motion, drop your knee, and pull it directly into the downward figure-eight with no ill consequences. At the top of the upward figure-eight, from either direction, all you have to do is drop your knees and drag directly into the downward shot. Which means that you could be, let's say we're doubling on a side, going upward at this diagonal, right at the top of the upper diagonal, I can let it float, drop my knees, and drop down that one, so I can go up from low right, down from high left, or the other way. I can come up from low left, down from high right. There is so much power to spare in dropping your knees like that, that you relax at the top of the motion, let it rotate on its axis, and then drop. You can completely reverse the direction of the sword without having to fight against the leverage of the weight of the head. One of the places I like to use that, a slightly altered version, is you can skip off of your opponent's shield as an intentional setup for your next shot, hitting it just with the very tip of your weapon at an angle, so it bounces up and floats, and then plan on throwing from that float position into somewhere else. You can do it without hitting their shield at all, but hitting their shield gets a response from them and actually makes it even easier for you to make that transition from up to down. All right, let's see where that is. We're going to cover it anyway. So, to be more complete in what Misty and I were talking about with the figure-eight in another kind of return, you may all recall the Bellatrix style, they throw it off the shoulder, and then they do like a teardrop return and back to the shoulder. This actually can be explained in terms of the figure-eight motion. that downward figure eight, this part of the downward figure eight is that teardrop return. If it cuts through, it comes on the other side, and you can do that return from the other side as well, just the same kind of return. Seeing it as part of the figure eight gives you the understanding that you could draw through and hit the other side. It gives you the understanding that your teardrop return doesn't have to come to the shoulder and stop, but can rather continue the motion back to the target again without stopping. The reason my blade is stopping right here is because it's hitting something, either a shield or a body. You wouldn't want to try to do the half stop like that without hitting something. If there's nothing there, it continues on through. There's your follow-up on the other side. When it hits something, you can return it along that side. And then if you miss, you're back on the other side of the figure eight. Or you're here, you intentionally pull a little short and hit to someone else. So just like the downward figure eight creates a teardrop down like this, the upward figure eight creates a teardrop coming upwards. And then if you miss, come across upwards on this side. And you can repeat this side too. That's striking, popping up, coming back, or repeating upward shots. And as with all the figure eights, if it's upwards, you're driving up with your knees, and if it's downward, you're dropping your knees. Understanding the two teardrop returns, the upward and downward teardrop, is part of the figure eight. And if you tie it to the figure eight, you realize you've got the same teardrop returns on the left side that you have on the right side. And if you miss the target, or if you intentionally pull short, you continue that figure eight motion and hit to the other side. This is as good a time as any to bring something up. Every now and again, I have someone come out of this class with the misunderstanding that they're to enter their next fight doing this. And you can do that. You won't hurt your arms. You won't hurt your opponent probably either. It's awfully predictable, and you tire yourself out. The real application is here, and maybe I'm preaching to the already experienced fighters, but these rules are going to apply to like 3 to 5 blow bursts. They're not going to be an ongoing pattern that you throw one heedless of what your opponent is doing. More importantly, though, you're trying to train your body to understand that after this motion, your body already knows and understands that it's got these options. It's got these follow-throughs, it's got these blows that naturally flow from the blow that you just threw. And I think if you train those motions, you're going to get that body understanding of how to move. And rather than thinking, now I'm going to throw my special 3-blow combo number 5, where I hit twice to the right side and once to the left side, instead you're going to think, I want to hit that right leg. You throw the right leg, and right about here you go, okay, I'm seeing this happen. I'm in motion. My body knows that I can reverse this and hit over there. So, since that's open, I'm going to reverse the throw here. Hey, look at that. It's still open, but I raised the shield that time. Okay, I'll just repeat that. Oh, my sword stopped here in long point. Now I see an opening over here. Boom. It's not a combination shot. It's a series of single shots, but they all flow one into the other without stopping. It's a subtle but really important difference because at every step of the way there's interaction between you and the reality of what's happening in the fight, what your opponent is or isn't doing, as opposed to just blindly firing something and seeing what comes of it. That's kind of playing battleship. You make this guess and just do your thing and see what happens. Sometimes you win. Yeah. All right. One thing to think about to train a little bit, now that we're talking figure eights, we're talking about this fluid transition. Take some time another day and play around with thinking about it now broken down. I come from high right to low left, stop, and then switch up to high left, and I come from high left to low right, stop. Bring it up here, break it down, and take the fluidity out, and try it like that, and then put the fluidity back. Being able to alternate between fluidity and non-fluid will have advantages to your timing and stuff. Or you could even go, I'm cutting from high right to low left, I'm going to stop there, I'm going to lift back up to high right and throw something else. Think about all the ways you can move from one basic guard to another basic guard and then do things from there. That allows a variety of things to do. I am a proponent of learning how to throw from a lot of different places and a lot of different guards for a number of reasons. One, it confuses your opponent, which is always a good thing. Two, it leads to less exhaustion in your muscles. It's like, if you stand like this, it's great for a couple minutes, but after about 10 minutes, it really gets tiring. But if you're allowed to move around, you know, it's not so bad. You're resting one muscle while you're tiring out another muscle. It's the same with your fighting. If you're alternating and moving and changing things, your energy will stay up. Whereas if you stay locked in one ideal guard position all the time, then those muscles are going to get tired. Alright, so let's move on to getting a more complete understanding of circles in general. Circular blows are made up of circles of the hand, the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. I've got a little chart here that explains all this. You can get online, circlesword.com, www.circlesword.com. You've got slips that tell you how to get there. But anyways, each of these circles has different advantages and disadvantages. So the circle of the hand, first of all, the circle of the hand is not a 360-degree circle, it's a partial circle, but I can get 180 degrees on a circle of the hand. All circle of the hand is when you're holding the sword, how many circular motion you get holding it close in your hand. So that's something you can add to your shots, certainly. Some people call that triggering, where you start with your sword in the left, and then you tighten down with your fingers, put it into motion. So there's a 180 degrees of circle that you can avail yourself of. The circle of hand is very fast, but it's the very weakest of all circles. And it's not a full circle, so really circle the hand all by itself. Maybe an armorer might be able to kill someone with it, but most of us probably don't have the grip strength to kill someone with just a circle of the hand. But we can add it to our other shots. Circle of the wrist is pretty fast. It's not as weak as circle of the hand, but it's not as strong as the other circles. So that's the circle, just in the wrist. I think if you're adding the proper body dynamics we talked about, you can probably kill with a 360-degree rotation with circle of the wrist, as long as you don't do any counting or any other errors of motion. Circle of the elbow, a bigger circle here. Here's an example, more or less just a circle of the elbow shot. The circle of the elbow is stronger still. A moderately strong fighter can probably kill with a half circle from circle of the elbow. So that would be like 180 degrees from here to here, this kind of top. It may not be the ideal way to throw this blow, but you can probably successfully get a kill blow using your arm muscle with a 180-degree turn circle of the elbow. Circle of the shoulder. Circle of the shoulder is very powerful, but it's slower than the other circles. You'll see that what we're doing here is we're moving from really fast and really weak to really slow and really powerful. That's the scale we're moving through here. So circle of the shoulder, that's circles that set on the shoulder. These can look like chops to people, but in fact they are small portions of the bigger circular motion. I can call them figure eights from the shoulder. It is a very powerful circle, so you can kill with a quarter turn. So let's see that this would be 180 degrees to the target, but I can actually go from here to the target. If I drive it the other way, I've got the muscle here, I may very well be able to kill with a quarter turn from the shoulder. Those are the more rude attacking styles are often really just circle the shoulder styles that are used in the first quarter of that circle that are in the shot. The more skilled fighters like that, they feel that circle, and if they miss that chop, they continue that circle on something else. They feel that there's that circle after the chop. Things don't know where they're supposed to go. And lastly is the circle of the torso. Circle of the torso is the slowest circle. It's extremely powerful, but all by itself it's not fast enough to create the percussion necessary to cleave armor. So, this is the circle of the torso. I can't quite get the 360 degrees out of it, maybe 180. Lots of power there, but all by itself without adding anything to the feet in the hand or the wrist or something faster, it just hits too slow to create the chainring. But nonetheless, there's a lot of power there. This may be a good time to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how one circle leads to another, but I want to regress for a minute and talk about that circle of its power. Something I was noticing watching the video was that even with pretty experienced fighters, what I see a lot of times is when they add the circle of the body to the glove, they add power to their shot, the shoulder is not strong enough to transmit the power of the circle of the body into the arm and therefore make it available to the circle of the shoulder, the hand, and the elbow. So what happens is, instead of this all staying stable and moving into the shot, the body rotates and all of this kind of lags behind for a moment. And they end up with the body turning without having added much to this because the shoulder's lagging. It's not strong enough to transmit the turn and then run basically with the arm. One of the solutions that's worked for me as far as resolving that, and I'm not a hugely buff guy, so I need all these little tricks I can, is if I started out by actually touching my elbow to my side to start my blows. So kind of like formaldehyde when your hands go on your shoulders. You think of yourself like that. Because everything's all attached here. There's no arm out here. It's hand attached to the shoulder in your mind. And that will go just like that. Keep that attachment. And then at the end, once all the power's been generated, it's perfectly okay to reach a little to get out to where you need to go. And that, because it's locked into the body, that eliminates that mushiness in the shoulder and translates all that body's energy into making it available to your hand. For me, that shot is really mostly circle of the hand, circle of the body. I'm not really using much elbow, wrist, or shoulder anymore, but because that transmission is efficient enough between the body and the hand gets the speed, the body gets the power. What I found eventually is two things. One, I didn't have to attach it to the side. I could also attach it to the front, so I have options here. I can throw this kind of thing with these angles, or I can bring it to the front and throw these up. And then after you experimented with that for a while, you find that you don't even really have to put your elbow against the body. The fact is, you can let it drift out a little bit as long as you have a body mental awareness of this locked relationship here, where it's important that this alignment between your upper arm and your body remains the same, that those are locked, that they move at the same time, and keep a little stiffness there so that you don't get this lag in the shoulder as you turn the body. But actually touching it to the body as you throw is a good way to begin training that. And you can fight pretty well from there. You can actually go out and practice and not get slaughtered. And then eventually you can let that drift out a little bit once you've established that mental link between the relationship of your upper arm and your body. That's been really good for me because I've always had a weak onside shot, especially because I do a right leg lead, which makes it even worse. Getting that connection between my upper arm and my body has really helped with power on that side, including throwing shots from my knees. Suddenly a little twist of the body, all that force translates into the hand and allows me to throw harder down there, which is more of a struggle. Alright, so let's talk about how circles lead into each other. The truth is, most of the time in the classic shot, the classic Bellatrix snap is a combination of a whole bunch of circles, one leading into the next. It's a great shot. It's what I would call an advanced shot, though. And I think there's an advantage to understanding all the little components and being able to use them individually, as well as being able to stack them up and use them all in conjunction and chain with each other. But let's talk about that chain a little bit. So, in a classic shot like that, you've got, another digression. The weak shoulder. Last time I took Bellatrix's class, he explained the writing position like this. He started us here. You move the hand back until it couldn't go any farther, and then went to here. So what does that mean? That means that this joint is as fully extended as they can extend, right? Which means, it's a deflection here, which means when the body starts to turn, no lag, right? Because it simply cannot lag because you stretch that muscle as far as it can stretch. Which means that body motion immediately is translated to the hand, and then it goes on to the rest of the blow dynamics. But that's another way of eliminating that squishiness in the shoulder is by extending it as far as you can go before you throw the shot. So anyways, circles there. You've got, let's see, you can drive the circle of the hip, which coils through the whole body and turns into the circle of the body. You're rotating on your central axis. At that point, usually the elbow comes across, so you've got a circle of the shoulder building. It really hasn't been a lot of source motion yet, but all these circles are already building up. They're starting to translate from one to the other. You get to here, the hand is outside of the elbow, so you've got circle of the elbow starting, and then at the very end, you can have circle of the hand or circle of the wrist. And that's the blow delivering shot. At which point, it becomes a circle of the wrist issue. If you want to roll through and throw another shot, or you've hit, you're on your figure eight, but you can return it back along counting the figure eight. So there are one circle leading into another. Another interesting way of looking at that is that what we're struggling with in our circles is leverage and the weight of the sword. We're not so concerned with our bodies. I can do this without hurting myself, but if I do that with a sword in my hand, it hurts because of all this extra leverage and weight. So you can stop the hand, you can't stop the sword if you don't want to hurt yourself. So what that means is, if I've got a circle of most of the shoulder here, this big driving shot, right, and I get to here, I can stop the hand. I don't want to stop the sword. So here it is, circle of shoulder. Hand stops. The sword can keep rotating on the circle of the wrist. The sword does not have to stop. This is something especially useful for people who like to throw a circle of the shoulder short chopping shot, is that they can stop the hand at the end of the chop, but they can continue the motion of the sword if they want to. All right, let's see. Has anybody thrown the old-fashioned high-lever snap that doesn't have anywhere to go at the end? That's how I busted my elbow originally. So I guess we'll run through the lecture on that. There are two returns to that that don't involve screwing up your elbow. One takes some forethought. And honestly, I'm not sure if it's realistic to practice forethought of using it. Because the problem is, we could all throw this, right? That's fine. That's not going to hurt you. You can always transition to here. The tendency is you really want to reach to get over that chip. Because that's where the target is, right? And once we get all twisted up here, there's nowhere to go. And that's where the danger is if we miss something. So one solution to that is to think of it as an upward figure eight. So here's an upward figure eight, right? This is an upward figure eight with the hand fairly high. But if it misses, you continue on with figure eight motion. That's well enough in theory, and it can work. You have to be careful not to skip off the helm. You've got to relax it as it hits the target before allowing it to spin upwards. And it does work. But the fact is, you're going to want that extra little inch of breathe that you can't get while keeping it a true figure eight. And it's that extra inch that's going to cost you your elbow. So there is another solution, a sort of brute force method of allowing the sword to continue its motion. So if I throw here, actually since you didn't want to do it, let me do it here and you can watch it. So I'm going to throw here. Go ahead and catch this with your hand and hold it. Okay. So what he's simulating by holding onto it with his hand is all the weight and momentum that has been generated by my shot coming in, right? That it's hard to deal with at that point. And the problem I have is that I can't continue rotation any farther from here. So the solution is, this is in the wrong alignment. What you have to do is switch out. Get your elbow above the tip of your head. So now at this angle, obviously I can continue my motion. So what happens, if there's very little time there to do this. And so what you really have to focus on is getting your elbow, loosening your hand, and getting your elbow above the top of your head. At which point the sword can continue its motion. So it's here, hang on to it. Notice also what the shoulders do. So shoulders go into reverse rotation as this happens. And that can allow your orientation to the movement of the sword to be completely reversed so there's room to continue moving. I'm not really sure I recommend that high-nerve snapping. I don't use it anymore, but I'm getting old and things hurt. But if you do, train that return so that you've got a way of getting out of it.
I do that when it's rising.
What's that?
I do that when it's rising.
Yeah, that's how it's great, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's safer. So it doesn't get quite as sweet an angle, but it's so much safer. I sure would recommend it.
Well, part of it is that it starts short, or it starts here, but when you throw and you raise your arm, you're shortening, you're making the circle smaller, which increases the velocity. And so your circle still is almost in a plane. It's just that your blade is up higher, and you can still.
Right, yeah, the angle's right. You can still go for the upward figure eight, which has the advantage not only of saving your elbow, but allowing you to transition into a second shot.
Right. I think the cheat, though, and the other thing about it is the fact that my opponent that I throw this at, his face is up here. So he's still in this plane, going this way. That's a good shot.
His face is up here.
Yeah, fair enough. My photo bag is that. That's right. It's specific for that here, but it's still, now that I think about it, is going horizontal. I'm not actually.
Your kid's not in there.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm going, well, with the center helmet, I'm going over that top edge. And it's Yeah, basically, everyone jump over his friend.
It's actually easier with your offside.
Yeah, don't lock your elbow too.
With the offside trying to drop it, because there you really don't have a place.
Your elbow, you roll your hand. Right?
Yeah.
Then you put your hand below.
I never have to drop my tip disc, he said.
You can throw that to the right side. You're going to throw that snap out of the iron chicken. You can never, no matter how tempting it is, lock the elbow.
No.
Because the key, what happens is you throw your elbow, when you throw it up, if you don't keep this position, you're screwed. As soon as you lock to this is where the injury is, right? So no matter how tempting it is to pop that hand up to here and lock that elbow. So, I mean, that's what you have to train, is that no matter when you're coming back through that, you've got to come back through this motion, you can't come up. If you're coming up, the natural way of the sword, when it comes through, hits, if it ticks up at all, will rock the ball.
Yeah, very clever.
I'm just saying, if you're going to throw it, keep it up to the bench.
Yeah. All right, so let's further refine some training. That first shot, I told you this was coming. I lied to you about the circle stuff in the sense that the very first shot is different than all those other shots once you start in motion. There are some weird physics that go on that make things different. So hey, I got circles. So once your sword is in motion, centrifugal force is keeping it pointing out there at a right angle to the center of the circle. But when you start from a stop position and you start moving your hand in a circular motion, watch what happens to the sword. Okay? So in the beginning, at all crucial beginning, watch what happens. The tip drags behind like that, and then once you get moving, it starts to whip out there and be out on the end of the circle. And it's really only when it's tracing out there on the end of the circle that all this stuff remains true about pulling back against the weight, the small motion, making the big motion. All that stuff is true once the tip gets out there at the edge of the circle. But while it's here, not so much yet. And there's some other things we got to think about. So that all crucial first blow, we got to deal with the fact that it drags along here before it's out there on the circle. All right. So there are two good ways that you can deal with that. One is triggering. Remember, circle the hand. That's this thing, loose hand, timing out gets in motion. Once it's in motion, you can loosen the hand again. So if I'm throwing from here, and I want this out on the end of the circle during my motion, I can trigger the hand right at the beginning, and that puts the blade into motion, and it puts it out on the end of the circle right away. So all those motions, those dynamics being in the circle apply very early on. That's useful if you're like here and you're fanning a shot around to here. You can tighten the hand so that immediately all your body motion is spitting that way out on the end of the circle. So you trigger the hand first and then turn the body. Another way to deal with it, though, is to exaggerate that drag and take advantage of it. Thorin is a master of that, in that he'll do the circle of the body, but he'll leave the tip behind. He'll keep it dragging inside of that circle until the very end, until he's rotated past the line of defense, and then he'll trigger the hand a little bit and let that tip ride out. So he's kind of conserving that tip momentum until the end, and then he's taking advantage right at the end of the shot, or more often at an angle or something that sets in. So he's building all the circle of the body, maybe a little circle of the shoulder, but he's holding that tip back, not letting it extend out on the circle until it's at the right time, and then he's triggering the hand and sending that tip out. We sometimes let it kind of insert inside a box that's available instead of trying to kind of raise it down. Okay, let's see. So one of the things that you can emphasize on first blows that relates to this, and honestly, when we think of wording it, there's a tendency to kind of go, it's kind of blank the brain to that awkwardness at the very beginning where you get it moving and then you're, oh, I'm all happy, now I'm swinging it. This is the part I understand. But that very beginning, it has something to tell us too. In that what happens is you drag your hand in a single direction for a while. You're not circling it, you just drag it in a direction, and that gets all the way to the string, lined up with the direction of motion, and then you get your circle going and swinging around. So it's kind of like, there we go. Little landing string. In fact, I wonder if I can do this without hurting myself. We'll start doing it on the ground so you can kind of see it. So we're here, we're dragging along, now we're going. Right? That's kind of what happens in reality when we start something like this. Drag it up, now we're going in a circle. So it's the same with the sword blows, and then you can start with dragging the pommel forward to get everything in motion a little bit, and then you're in your circle. There's this little drag. And if you're starting from back here, that little drag is forward towards your target, and then you fire it out. If you're starting from here, that little drag is backwards. You're actually dragging your pommel back towards you, and then throwing a shot. So it's a little drag, and then you return that ellipse. It's not quite a circle, it's more of an ellipse, and you're returning a circular shot to the target.
So do you think that's why it's so easy to transition into the circle from those set thrust positions you were talking about? Because every one of them really has that ability to come out of that drag relatively quickly. Whereas rather than I'm dragging the sword through, if I'm here, I'm starting the motion that starts in the circle. Is that?
Yeah,
Do you think you said, coming from the guards?
Well, yeah, the guard is kind of, it's natural to kind of put the hand forward and then point it out.
Right. I mean, this is the obvious one, right? But if you're here, that's going to come over without the drag, right? You're
Well,
going to turn to the circle.
It's more like if you arrive at one point, at this point you're in a soft position and momentarily. So really what we're talking about is starting to go from here, not from here.
Yeah, but don't you think you could transition the circle halfway along?
Well, maybe. There is something in there. Yeah, there is something I have thought about. It's not really in my notes. But it involves swapping around the center of balance on the object. So an example of this is if I'm in a high guard position like this, I can throw a snap like this, at which point I am rotating the sword around my wrist. Right? I'm fighting the entire mass of this weapon is being accelerated around the circle of the wrist. If I'm really strong, I may be able to do that. But I can cheat. I can reduce the weight and mass of this weapon by swapping the hand around the point of balance. Now, if I swap it around the center of balance on this weapon, I will cheat almost all of the weight of the weapon away, at which point I would probably not be hitting hard enough. That's a complete swap. Probably not enough power with a complete swap. But I can do a partial swap, like here, and retain about half the weight of the weapon while reducing some of it, allowing me to get more speed, which will translate into a harder hit, even though I've reduced the effective mass of the weapon. And that allows me to get that speed. I'm cheating away some of the mass of the weapon. So we're swapping around the center of balance. Now, here with the thrust, something very interesting can happen. So if you're thrusting here, you can turn this thrust into an upward cut for the leg by swapping around the center of balance. So watch what happens here. Here's the thrust. Watch the center of balance. Here comes the thrust. The center of balance stops. The hand continues to move forward to the blow. So the hand goes boom, but the sword stops and then rotates and hits. So, thrust, rotates around the center of balance. Double hit.
It's a classic transition.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We already covered some of this. I want to throw this in here just so we don't forget about it. A lot of folks have probably seen this before already. Talking about a way of keeping fluidity with repeating an offside shot. It's behind the head pendulum. A way to get to this is, well, first of all, the blow you want to throw is this. Here's what you're going to hit. We're talking about a flat plane, horizontal plane. We're getting about 3/4 of a circle from the ready position to hitting the target, which is plenty to get enough power there. Mostly circle the hand and wrist, get a little bit of body and shoulder in there as well. But we're starting from here. So to fluidly get from here to here and then back to here as quick as we can, one of the best ways to do it is to pull it back to here, relax everything, and allow the weight of the weapon to pendulum itself up into this ready position. So here's where we're going to start, here's where we're going to hit. When you get back to there, pull the hand back and relax, and it'll swing your tip right back up to there. Not even typically like that. All right. What else do we have here? Get down in the fiddly bits. being out here. Once your opponent has figured out that one of the places we like to be is right here because you can throw all kinds of blows from here, you start needing an excuse to get out there. You can't just, I want to hit the leg. One of the ways that you can cover that, though, is weak setup blows. Just throw it with circle the hand mostly, pop it out there, and then go where you really want it to go. Usually it was enough like a blow to keep your attention and give an excuse for your blade to be out in that position. You can throw blows that linger on the point of contact, so it's a real blow, but instead of immediately moving on to the next blow, I just relax and it hits the shield. Let it hang there on the shield. Now you're all relaxed, neutral. You can throw anywhere from there because you're throwing circles from a position. In the process of changing guards, if you're always locked in a guard and you move to here, it means something. But if you're loose and you're switching positions, you're moving around, I'm in long point right now, but it looks like it was just part of a transition to another guard or whatever. The fact that you're in motion makes it meaningless. A false thrust, a real thrust, you're setting up whatever angle is best, you're getting everything ready here. So what I really want is to be here, opposite of this cut. So instead of throwing the thrust that would make sense for thrusting, I might throw that thrust with my hand and stuff already cranked in the line, the edge already aligned for the cut I want to make, not for the thrust. So the thrust means nothing. It's just a way of setting myself up to throw the cut that I want to thrust. It's an awkward thrust, but it's a great setup for the shot. This leads us to something that came out of a book on sleight of hand magicians. They talk about magic misdirection. The idea is, if you need to do your magic trick, if you need to do something for the mechanics of the trick, you need to move this ball from here to here. That's essential that it happens. And you don't want your audience to see that. You have to cover it with another action. It can't just be any action. It has to be an action that makes sense to the observer, an action that has an explanation. That they go, they move that way because, and they think they have an answer to that because. It's not the right answer. You're concealing something that you're doing is essential to the trick. So it's the same for your fighting. If you need to do something to set up your next blow, they need to see it as a movement that makes sense to them, but doesn't tell them the important information of what they're actually planning on doing. So like that false thrust, setting up the cut, it seems like a perfectly rational thing for you to have done, and it just happens that they blocked it, that you flubbed their aim. But it's actually setting up the cut. The reason it works is because that thrust, when you finish that thrust, to them, that interaction is over. They know why you did it, they think, because they wanted to focus on the tip of the weapon. They know what came of it, it failed, story over. But for you, it's just setting up the cut. All right. Okay, let's talk about sword blocking. That's everything I got for you on cuts and stuff. But we're going to tie our sword blocks into it a little bit. We're going to go back to core concepts to start with. The core concept for blocking is that your block should be perpendicular to the oncoming weapon. I got that term right. So, whatever attack is coming at you, you want your sword to form an X with it. And the closer to a true X it is, whatever angle the blow coming in is, the more security you have. The less of a true X it is, the more it gets like this, the more likely they're going to get past and slip past your defense. So you're forming an X against their attack. That's going to give you the maximum protection. Obviously, when you're on the other side of the equation and you're trying to hit your opponent, you don't want to form an X with their blocking surfaces. You want to keep parallel to their blocking surfaces, whether that be the top edge of their shield or their sword. You want to slide in parallel. Let's see. Some useful visualizations and categorizations for blocking. We really have two kinds of blocks. We have vertical blocks, which the weight of the weapon is stacked above the hand. It could be a little slanted this way or this way. And then we have hanging blocks where the weight of the weapon is hanging below the hand. It could be at an angle like this. It could be back here. Lots of different hanging guards. But essentially, the weight of the weapon is hanging below the hand. It could even be, I would classify this as a hanging guard myself, because if you relax at all, that's where it's going. It's not really stacked. The weight is not stacked up on your hand. It really is just on the edge of the hanging. So some visualizations that are useful in realizing just how much defense is available to you from your sword. One is the cone or umbrella. So if your hand is above your head, you're talking a hanging guard. The cone surrounds you completely. You've got blocks all the way from here, to here, to here, to here, to here, to here, to here. All the way around. Complete umbrella. Guard you top of the head, all the way down to mid-ribs or so. That's a lot of available protection. You can raise up to the cone this way. You can raise up to the cone this way. You can get into that cone from a couple different places. But your sword is available for defense in all those positions. The cylinder is a stack block, so here you are. You've got a cylinder covered from the hips on up. With the turn of the torso, you can really get a complete 360-degree coverage with the cylinder. That's the high cylinder. There's also a low cylinder that you almost never use in the SCA. On horseback, you would be using this to protect your horse and your legs, though. The hanging guard. That's a good occasional in the SCA. So those are useful visualizations. And realizing that you can put your sword into a blocking position 360 degrees around your body, either in a vertical or a hanging guard. Let's talk about the nature of different kinds of defense. There's two kinds. There's static defense and there's active defense. Static defense is already blocked by your guard positions. The advantages of a static defense is it limits your opponent's options to attack. It's always on. The disadvantages are that it forces your opponent to reach into hard-to-block zones for their attack, and it allows your opponent to size up your defensive preferences and often your offensive preferences. So if I've got, say, a heater shield here and I'm like this, I've got a lot of passive defense. Even if I fall asleep here, they can't hit the front of my body. They can only hit a tiny bit of my leg. They can't hit the front of my helm. They're going to have to reach to hit the side of my helm. I've got a lot of defense just because of the way I'm standing. So that's passive defense. But my opponent, because I'm doing this, they're not going to throw a helm blow like this. They're going to throw a helm blow like that, right? They're going to try to get over this guard or whatever. Or they're going to throw some complicated feint, try to draw me out of position and throw. They're going to do something tricky that's harder for me to block because I've got so much covered already. So there's the downside of having a strong passive defense. And passive defense can be tiring to hold as well. So an active defense is moving to the blocking position while being attacked. The advantages of an active defense are it encourages your opponent to strike at easy to block targets. Why would I throw this when the guy's standing there like this, right? You smack him. But if you just smack him, the block is as easy as this. It keeps the exact nature of your block and the potential repose from it a surprise. So it matters whether, and we'll go back to this a little bit, but it matters whether I block like this or like this. Because from here, I can throw this shot. From here, I can throw that shot. So the kind of block that I make determines what my next move is likely to be. And because I'm not in a blocking position to begin with, they don't know which of those blocks I'm going to use, therefore they don't know which repose I'm going to use. Whereas if I'm here, they know that after the block, my likely response is going to be this shot. The disadvantages of an active defense is that you're open until you move the block. So if someone's much faster than you, they can hit you, even though you made the right block. And even worse, if you're caught unaware, you will really be hit. Because you're doing nothing. You're leaving it all hanging out there. So those are two big disadvantages. Examples of static blocking are everywhere. Even someone who fights like this has some static blocking going on. They've eliminated most of the leg and body as a target. They've really made the fight from here up. So even though they've got active defense from here up, they've simplified their lives by really having all this other stuff covered. They don't have to think about that other stuff. All they have to think about is what's now open. So you'll see varying degrees, you can use varying degrees of active versus passive blocking, static versus passive. My recommendation is to not overdo the static blocking. Don't try to always cover every target area, instead use active blocks to deal with known openings, and think about how you can use those active blocks to set up your next shot. Which is what we're moving on to next. Active sword blocks can have several variants, one of which is striking at the blow that's coming at you. It's pretty clear to see how striking at the blow coming at you could result in tying into our offensive figure eight, right? And so we've already determined that throwing a blow, we can continue the motion into another blow. We can see how that block could lead to that. So here comes the shot. I throw it down to a figure eight. I interfere with the shot. Continue the figure eight into another shot. Or I throw it down to a figure eight. Make the block. Stop there. This guy's strong. Bounce back along the figure eight. Return into another shot. The throwing a blow into their blow, clearly it can be directly into your repos. You don't have to reset before throwing the shot. Another way of dealing with an attack is receiving the blow by the sword by moving it into its path. So that's more the classic hand block, the shot kind of block. If you intersect their sword by putting your sword somewhere along your figure eight pattern, you can move fluidly from that block into another blow. So rather than just statically, oh good, I stopped it, and then sighing in relief and going back to your fight, you can actually think ahead and go, I don't want to hit that leg, so I'm going to square up here. Oh, okay, we're squared up. Oh, no, onside shot, that's the one. Okay, what I want is an onside shot. Oh, here comes the onside shot. Oh, goody. Okay, so here's the sword block for the onside shot. And that's right along the figure eight for that leg. What I was getting at with that little scenario is you can't always rely on them giving you what you want, but what you can do is deny the fight until they do give you what you want. So if you've decided I want that figure eight for that shot there, you can just keep refusing everything else they give you until they throw the shot you want them to throw, and then move to that block and throw. It's a bit of a cheat, but it's effective. So let's talk a little more about blocks along the figure eight. Let's see here. So upward figure eight. Here's our upward figure eight. Right there is pretty much the best blocking position along this side for the upward figure eight. One interesting feature about blocking along the figure eight is it tends to lead to blocking with the flat of the weapon. There is a lot of argument among historical folks as to whether blocks are made with the flat or with the edge. I don't really feel very strongly one way or another about it, but I started experimenting with blocking with the flat, and for me, in our SCA stick game anyways, I find that blocking with the flat allows me to already have the edge pointing in the direction that I'm going to be generating force and movement towards my next blow. And that has an obvious advantage. Remember, I was talking about as soon as possible, get that edge pointing in the direction of travel before you generate the body power on the shot. And that accomplishes that in most cases for me. So, if an onside shot, stack block with the flat, right along the figure eight, I'm with the upward sweep this way. Another example, let's see, downward figure eight, downward figure eight. With the downward figure eight, right after the turnover, as you start to lift up again, you're in this position. Does this look familiar to anybody? Okay, and it's a flat block. You're presenting the flat of your weapon to their attack, sheltering yourself with that. And that is this part of the figure eight pattern. So, along that figure eight, if you happen to catch a shot there, that's the blow that's all set up for you. That downward diagonal from coming across from high right, below that cut. That could go for a leg, go for a head. So you're probably not going to say, here comes the blow, and move through a figure eight and catch it there. But instead, you're going to be here, you're going to lift to that spot and recognize that once you've had the contact, you're along the line of your figure eight path. It's easy to immediately translate into a shot. If you block with the edge, you'd have that one added step after the block, having to turn your hand and then throw the cut. Let's see. Some little variants. Seating blocks, which is when you catch a blow early on and you ride it back. One example of this is it's like fighting against pole arms. We call it making short the distance, where they got this big pole arm out here, and you kind of reach out and you lay your weapon against theirs, so you can feel what they're doing. If they try to power into you with a sudden cut, you're not going to be able to pose it out here. Their leverage is too great, right? But you kind of ride it back. You let them push your weapon back into you, turn the flat, so that's fair enough. You can take a hit from your own flat. And you start gaining power as it gets back towards here, too. You'll start slowing it down as it rides in. And what's going to happen is it's pinned against your body. It's ridden in with a flat, which puts your cutting edge in a line to release and throw. You're not trapped against your body edge to edge. You're like this. So that means you can slide out from between the two things and throw a shot. Against sword, it's a little different. Like, I try to use this on Davin sometimes, and sometimes it works, and sometimes I get my head crazy. But he's so fast that it's very dangerous for me to wait back here and just try to catch something. In fact, I made that mistake this last Ursa, I tried to catch close and I got killed. I've been more successful at times with trying to reach out. So as soon as I see him begin his motion, he's starting to throw something. I feel the pressure. I'll reach out and present the flat of my weapon to his weapon way out here. And so right as this blow launches, I establish contact. And here comes this fast shot, but it's being slowed down the whole time by dragging my sword along with it. And at the very end, that's when I can release and throw a shot. And by that time, I know right where his sword is too, which is a little moment of safety where the sword is in a known position. And I have to release and throw a shot. Another thing you can do to make your blocking work better is to face the block. This is something Thor likes to talk about, is facing the threat. If the threat is up here, you just turn and face that threat. The threat's up there, you turn and face the threat. It's just much easier to deal with something where all your body's aligned in a comfortable position, rather than doing some kind of awkward reach around thing. So face where the likely threat is, certainly face where the active happening threat is when you see a sword coming in. Find a repose from the block. We've been talking about this. One of the things to understand psychologically is if you apply 100% of your mind to blocking the attack that's coming at you, the odds are, except for maybe against the very, very best opponents, that you will successfully block. You can go out there and try to just be defensive and last forever practically on the fighting field. The reason we get hit is that's not all we're trying to do. We're also trying to hit our opponent. And that one, that takes us out of position and allows them to have some openings. Two, that means part of our brain is thinking about hitting them rather than thinking about defending ourselves. But it's a trade-off we're willing to make because we want to win some fights. We don't want to just go out there and block all day. So fair enough. Now, when you move to block, and you're blocking in a fashion that sets up your next shot, it is going to bleed off about 10-15% of your blocking effectiveness. You're going to use part of your brain for figuring out where your next blow is and positioning yourself in preparation for that blow, using the rest of your brain to actually successfully complete the block. So, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit on the defensive end to give you a big gain on the offensive and a second later if you survive your block. So it's just something to understand what's happening there mentally is that you've only got so much brain power, you've only got so much body movement, you're taking a little bit out of the defense and putting it into the pool of the offense when you do that kind of blocking. There we go. Okay, so some things to think about then, the new paradigm when you start thinking of blocking this way. To start thinking of your opponent's attacks as an opportunity to use one of your block-to-blow techniques. An opponent is best defended when they are in their guard, ready to receive your attack. They are more vulnerable when they have committed to a particular defense, and more vulnerable still when they are executing an attack. This becomes the key to being in the zone in your fighting. Everything your opponent does, even attacking you, should be viewed as a useful opportunity. So it's a different way of looking at the fight. You want your opponent to attack you because it gives you an opportunity to do a block-to-blow transition, and it leaves them more open than when they're standing there just watching you with everything in their ideal blocking position. All right, so that sums up the majority of the class. I've got a couple real quick little tidbits I usually add at the end. Just little tricks that kind of tie into this stuff. One is combining the shot with the falling advance. Remember we talked about how as long as your knees are inside of your foot placement, if you relax your knee, you will fall in the direction of that leg. We also talked about how throwing a downward shot, if you relax your knees, you fall downwards, so you generate force in the downward shot. So, if I'm throwing like a downward diagonal shot, and I'm standing, let's say my opponent is here, and I'm just out of range, if I stack my weight on this leg, I throw a downward diagonal shot, I can generate power by dropping my weight, and if I stack up the weight here, and just release this knee, I'm going to fall forward at the same time. So I'm advancing, and I'm adding power to my shot, while not expending any muscular energy. All I'm actually doing is relaxing my front leg for a moment to generate power and closing distance. Let's see. Making short the distance, we talked about that one. Partial blow reverse. But it has to do with throwing an offside shot here and feinting an onside shot. So basically, in clumsy form, it would be, here's the onside shot, no, it's not, it's an offside shot, right? But the problem is getting that to really happen with a heavy stick and happen efficiently. And what he would do is, this is where he wanted to throw his offside shot. He's going to throw, a little more than a quarter spin to the onside shot, smack to the face. So he would lock his body here, and he would rotate his torso like this, but this positioning all stays the same. Nothing is changing here. He's staying in this position, but the rotation of the torso gives the impression that this blow is coming. You see the sword moving along this arc like it's coming from the eye. So he does this little quick, and that actually is even all the more wound up to throw the offside eye shot. That's a nice little trick. Let's see. Thrust to cut, we dealt with. Walk down to the center of balance and weapon. Smooth acceleration shots are an interesting thing to think about. The way physics opponent and opponent were looking at each other. Oh, don't let me forget compass steps. I don't have that in my notes, but I want to talk about it. So here we are facing each other, and I go, yeah! And I start this immediately big explosive motion. That immediately, at the very beginning of the motion, tells you something is coming, it's an attack, adrenaline comes up, make a block, throw a shot, do something, you're in trouble, right? Whereas, if there's a lot of casual motion, a slow motion movement like this doesn't do anything yet. There's no threat yet. So, something to add into your repertoire are shots that, first of all, you've already got some motion going on, so you can get this far in your shot before anything unusual has happened. They've already seen this motion. This motion doesn't mean anything. But this time, this motion is setting up the body in rotation and motion for the shot. So this doesn't mean anything yet. And then the shot starts out slow. Reach the hand, leave the tip behind, forward style, say. You've already started your circle. You've already gotten to here before they might notice that something is happening. Now the speed stops and the shot comes out. So all this could mean nothing. And what that means is, really, instead of being faster, you have thrown 2/3 of your sword blows slower than usual. Your opponent's perception will be, they only see the last third of the blow. And to them, that will be blindingly fast because they'll have no warning. So you look faster for being slower. That's what I said.
Couldn't you, in theory, do that with all of your shots at any point in time in a circle? So, you strike the guy, it's slow, it's strong.
Yeah, and in fact, that's two things I wanted to bring up that relate to that. One is that, well, first of all, if you do long circular returns behind the body, you give yourself an opportunity to slow things down back there and reevaluate targets before you continue. It's all one fluid motion still, but you're allowing yourself an opportunity to not to throw the blow as soon as you can, but rather to throw the blow at the right moment when they're back in the open. One of my favorite blows is what I call an around the world, which is just a long circular shot coming from around through low right, up into high left, and then back around diagonally. The reason it tends to work is that there's got a whole bunch of tight stuff going on, and it comes up to here. And at this point, there is no telling what the timing of this blow is going to be. Because I'm watching and looking for the right moment to drop it in. And it's big, and it has multiple points at which the body can be added to the shot and be thrown. Because of the big motion. So you give yourself this sort of waiting period back here where you're still in motion, you're not stopped, you're not locked, you're not returned to a guard position, you're in motion, but you've still got options. You haven't really committed your body to the shot here. The other thing that relates to that reminds me that I want to talk about, is when to add power to your shots. And it's very closely related to what we just talked about there. A good example of that is the high guard snap. So let's say you're out here and you want to throw this snap like this. There are a number of different ways you can throw that snap. I mean, you can generate power right here, twist the hips and throw the shot. And in fact, in my youth, that's how that shot was thrown. And without having to return, that's why I busted my elbows. But and this one people like to score up to. It's really a nice rotation from there. But right here, you've already committed yourself. At this point, that's the blow you're going to throw. There's no choice once you fire that. Before you fire that, you could choose to say throw the leg, but once you start in a motion, you're committed. That leg is what you're going to throw. So it's effective, but in some ways limiting. The other thing that's kind of limiting about it, and the truism of the day was, you had to have both feet firmly planted on the ground to throw a powerful blow. Because that was true if you had to develop your power that early in your shot with a rotational force. What I've seen since then is a lot of people are still throwing a fanny shot, but something very subtle is going on in that from here to here, the sword is moving through the same motion, but from here to here, no significant power is going to act to the blow yet. It is really just power of the hand drawing the sword back to here. The body doesn't fire until the sword gets to here. Then the body is added to the shot. And I think that is generally a good generalization. It's not a 100% rule, but I think you're better served if the vast majority of the time you add your body, that powerful body rotation, to your shot when the sweet spot of your sword is behind the line of the shoulder. That comes out of Sean's stuff too, talking about getting the sweet spot of the sword behind the body, the line of the shoulders. What I would add to that is, even if it's in a full circle motion like this, you draw your hand back, you pull it back, and even so, you've added very little power all the way back to here. Because when it gets back behind you, that's when you add that powerful body to the shot. If you add it too soon, you waste it. Save it until you're in this ideal position where it can do the most for you, and then add the power of the body to the shot. I see in Sven's fighting that he does these snaps from here, but he's like airborne when he throws them. And that sort of defies logic if you're thinking about the force being generated early on in the shot. But I think what I'm seeing, and what he told me when I asked him about it anyways, was that he's actually generating the force once the sword gets to here. So he's starting the flip with the hand. When he gets to here, that's when the shot drives. So from here, that drive could manifest itself into a leap forward or whatever. It's all driving up out of the legs, but it's driving once the sword's back here. So it's forward motion, not rotational motion, that's driving that shot. Let's see. Other things. A useful thing to think about is throwing into the wake of a shot. So if you think of a sword as being a sail ship and it's on the water and it's moving along through the water, there's this wake behind the sword. When people fight, they think about their sword as a line of defense, especially in Around Shield Kingdom. You're supplementing the weak top round with the sword to cover some angles. And they get comfortable with the idea that they've got this zone of defense. When they throw a blow, that zone of defense disappears momentarily. The brain doesn't always adapt to that and realize the danger. Not only is there a new physical danger there, but because their mind is focused on throwing a shot, they're even less focused on defending their shield block than they would be any other time. So the ideal place to hit them is not just anywhere, but to hit them where the sword used to be. Feel that wake behind the sword and try to throw into the spot where the sword used to be. That's where their mind is least focused on defending himself. Jumping shots. So now that we've talked about generating force by straightening the knees and by dropping the weight, it starts to be pretty obvious that you can generate force in a shot with your feet off the ground. So if it's an upward sloping shot, as you push off the ground, that's how we generate power in an upward sloping shot, right? So if you push really hard, what happens? You come off the ground, right? So power is generated by pushing with your feet. It happens to take you off the ground. The shot hits. Obviously, with a downward shot, you relax down and you fall. So if you jump, you'll come down eventually. You drop the blow as you're coming down. One important thing to mention about jumping and fighting is that it's not like basketball. You don't want this elongated, stretching the spine out, kind of loose, long body jump. What you really want is you want to be in your stance. Remember, we're talking about pressing down into the ground with the bottom of the feet. That's how we're generating force in our shots. To jump, you push down with the bottom of your feet equally, just harder. So you go up. Just pushing down. You're not elongating and straightening your knees much at all. You're just shoving with the bottom of your feet. And you really only need a couple inches, just to alter the angle a little bit and find what you want to hit.
So when your hips are turned, you want to get power on the shot. Your hips are in the wrong position, so get up in the air. So
well, and also, if you push a little harder with your right foot, you're going to rotate that way. Left foot, you rotate that way. So you can create rotation even as you're leaving the ground. Before I forget, compass drill. When Sean presented that in his class, I thought, oh, that's cool, but I've been making steps and stuff. I don't see the big deal. I got to thinking about it more and more afterwards. And the thing that really bugged me about it was, But for those of you who may not have had it, the compass drill is the idea. You're standing in the middle of a compass star, and you take a 6-inch step north, you go back to the middle, take a 6-inch step, northeast, you step back to the middle, and you do all the directions, these little steps. It's very important that they're only 6-inch steps. So that's the basic compass drill. And what bugs me about it is you're facing an opponent. If I move over here, they just turn and face me. If I move over here, they just turn and face me. Our orientation stays the same against an opponent that's not sleeping, right? So I wasn't sure what I would use it for, really. But then what I started to notice was there are moments where your opponent does not adjust to what you're doing. First of all, 6-inch step, this is why the 6-inch step is important. If I step bigger than 6 inches, they're going to see it and feel it and respond to it. It suddenly goes from being to something that happened to mean something important that happened, and they respond to it right away. But the other thing is, if we're just spaced off here, we're really studying each other, I'm giving him all my attention, he's giving me all his attention, and I make a little movement, he's going to respond to that. If I move my sword, he's going to adjust his guard. That's just the way we do it, right? But if he's throwing a sword blow, and he throws, I block. That's the significant thing that's going on there. If I happen to step 6 inches this way while I block, that's insignificant at the moment it happens. It doesn't have anything to do with the block, and so it skips out of the mind. But if I make that block and step 6 inches while I make that block, set up my sword blow, I get one free shot in that new position before they adjust to it usually. So training yourself to always take a little step in some direction when you block can be beneficial. You may or may not take advantage of it, but the tendency is to lock in place while you're blocking. So if you train yourself to always step just a little bit as you make your defense, you'll start seeing things opening up that you wouldn't have. The other time, of course, to step is when you're throwing a blow. That's slightly less sneaky because they are watching to see what you do as you throw your blow. But what it can allow you to do is change where a blow gets. Like there is your comfortable snap, but the target is there. So instead of reaching your hand over here, you throw your comfortable shot, but you take your little 6-inch step and move the whole base of the cannon over a little bit. So you can throw what's comfortable and still hit a different target. And that's something I want to talk about also with the circular style. One of the things that can happen is you get all this beautiful figure 8 stuff here, and you can throw this figure 8 down low, you can throw it up high, and that gives you some like reach over the shield stuff and a little bit of interest. But there are limits to how much you can move it, and it's very easy to fall into throwing where it's most comfortable, right in the middle, and they hold their round shield right in the middle, and you throw all these beautiful shots, and they all hit the round shield right in the middle because your hand can't see the target. So the solution to that, there's two solutions. One is to reach way around things, and that has its moment, but it can be hard to do. The other is to use those compass steps and those little steps to change where you're launching this pattern from and give you access to targets. Something I missed on my, oh no, I do have one. There it is. Giving the sword hand a view of the target. This leads us to the next step. You don't have to be able to see a target to hit it. Your eyes don't have to be able to see it. The shield can be totally in the way of the target, you can still hit it. But your hand, your sword hand, has to be able to see the target. If there are eyeballs on your cup hilt, those eyeballs need to be able to see the target to hit it. And if they can't, then it can't hit it. It's just the way everything lines up, it can't be done. It explains some interesting things. The classic heater shield slanted down like this position is a response to the classic I'm ready to throw a shot position, which was right here. That meant the threat was coming from right there. There's my opponent, he's got it on his shoulder. There's the threat, it's high. It's on his right side, which is my left side, so I angle my shield high and over towards his sword side. What I'm doing is I'm presenting the flat of my shield to the eyeballs on his hand, giving the biggest possible flat surface to guard myself against the eyeballs on the hand. Not against his eyes, but against the eyeballs on the hand. So that's something to think about, especially as people start getting more complicated and throwing blows from all kinds of different places. This may not be the ideal shield position if their sword is over there now. It needs to come out and present itself to the new threat. Always be blinded to the hand. The other side of that, of course, is when you're throwing blows, is you need to give a view to your hand. Don't worry about your eyes seeing it. Figure out how to give your hand a view. And that may mean taking a little compass step so you can see, your hand can see around the bottom edge of the shield. You've got to give a view to the hand to be able to see something. Just barely has to see it, too. Sometimes we get the advice when you're facing an opponent on their knees that you need to throw a lot of blows on the way in. and that is a perfectly fine solution to not giving them a free shot at the loosey closed range. There are times though where you sense that I don't want to be throwing blows for some reason. I want to observe them as I step into range, but I still don't want to give them a free ride. And if you don't have a giant shield to cover yourself with, you may need some help. One of the things that you can do is think about crossing their weapon. And we talked about crossing the weapon to block. You can cross the weapon before they've thrown a blow too. They're in their ready position, and you see the angle of their weapon. You cross it so that visually you've got a cross against their weapon. They shift as you step in. You continue to shift your sword so it continues to cross wherever however the weapon's aligned as you close the range. It can be a way of shutting it down as you close without actually throwing blows if there's some reason you want to do that. All right, so I'll just read out the conclusion now for circle sword stuff. The idea here is that we've explored a complete system of sword work based on the principle of the circle. By understanding each movement as part of a circular pattern, we get several benefits. You get the ability to strike with powerful shots from a great variety of starting positions and circumstances. You don't just have one ready position. You get instinctual transitions from one blow to another, creating easy on-the-fly combination shots. They're all single shots, but one leads into another after you've evaluated what opportunities are there. The ability to strike from many angles and combinations resulting in sophisticated trick shots. So, like an offside rib is no longer a trick shot. It's a piece of one of the core figure eights. There's only 2 figure eights, so it's really not complicated at all anymore. It's just part of one of 2 essential patterns of the overall movement. You protect your joints from sudden stops and overextensions. This results in more fighting longevity and faster blows. And the integration of blocks with sword blow, resulting in fluid block-to-blow combinations and recos. Most importantly, the idea here is to create a simple system. It's based on a concept for which we all have a natural, almost instinctual feel. No longer do we need to be distracted during the fight with trying to remember a host of special, mutually exclusive techniques. Everything done with the sword stems from one unifying principle, just swing the weight around. So have fun with this, explore, create, develop your own personal, unique understanding of its subtleties, build for yourself a perfect toolbox, drill it until it recedes from thought like the alphabet, then work on becoming a craftsman, an artist, a poet, free from mind-cluttering technique, explore the heart of combat,